you're against me. I'm just.
Well, welcome. And so where were you in South
And I told.
I was reporting in Florence. Kind of a small town.
It's over between us. Complete. I know him well enough to know that this had not. This was not about you. Hi, Charlie.
Adam, did you go
Believe
home?
me, I totally get it. Oh, you're very. Thank you so much.
One of the new guys, eh? Did I go home? I know. Did you go see your mom?
I only FaceTime. Wonder if technology.
Oh, you did see that.
I got to Sarah. I talked to her for a while. Well, she ended up doing this.
Did she get as much time as Russian?
Mr. Messick.
No comment. Too many
Get
cameras
something.
around.
Anyway.
Yes.
No,
we
I
got a
didn't. She
really
ended up
good
going to
shoot
Cape
but I don't think Dennis, which makes me sad. But it's okay. I'll get over it.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
Control Commission. First item on the agenda is the agenda. Commissioner Roof,
Thank you, President Wright. I move that we adopt the agenda.
seconded by Councilor Mason. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have the agenda. Item number 2 is the consent agenda. Commissioner Roof,
I move that we adopt the consent agenda, taking the actions as indicated.
moved by Councilor Roof, seconded by Councilor Pine. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have adopted the consent agenda and taking the actions indicated. On item number 2.02, Commissioner Roof. No, excuse me, that's not correct.
I
Is there-
believe you're looking for a motion to adjourn.
We are looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Roof, seconded by Commissioner Tracy. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously, and we are adjourned with the Liquor Control Commission. I will now convene the regular meeting of the City Council at 7:11, and would you please join with me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance. First item on the agenda is the agenda. Councilor Busher.
Thank you. I'm going to move to amend and adopt the agenda as follows. Note updated documents in motion for consent agenda item 3.05, communications, Cindy White, Director of Burlington Bike Path, Director of Parks and Rec, regarding the Burlington Bike Path Rehab Phase 3A construction. And then to note a lease document for consent item 3.11, communication, Burlington International Airport, Gene Richards, Director of Aviation, regarding lease amendment of office space within the terminal for Transportation Security Administration, terminal office space, conference room and storage space, per Marie Friedman.
Agenda as amended has been moved by Councilor Busher, seconded by Councilor Roof. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of adopting the agenda as amended by Councilor Busher, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have our agenda. I am going to move ahead because I have nothing else I can really act on before the public forum, and that's another 17 minutes, so I'm going to move ahead to item number 5, committee reports. Any committee chair who would like to report on committee activity? Councilor Busher.
Thank you. So I am the acting chair of the Ordinance Committee, and we are meeting tomorrow night in Conference Room 12 from 5 to 6 to continue our discussion regarding the EML, what is that? Zoning amendment, sorry. The committee has deliberated at our past meeting and chose to divide the question. We moved one addition to the south of Home Avenue to the full council that had to do with banks and credit unions, but we're still looking at performing arts space, and that's what the topic will be tomorrow night. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Busher. Councilor Pine?
Yes, thank you. The Community Development and Neighborhood Revitalization Committee will be meeting on the 6th of June. I know it's a ways from now, but I thought it was good to get it out there. The discussion, and it will be at 5:30 p.m. in Conference Room 12. The committee's focus right now is the Burlington Neighborhood Project, which I think all the counselors are fully aware of what that is, but for the public, it is really a multi-pronged effort to grapple with both housing affordability and housing conditions and neighborhood quality of life in the neighborhoods closest to the University of Vermont and Champlain College, and trying to get a handle on the issues that have really been vexing this community for a long time. So that's what we're trying to get to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pine. Councilor Roof, and then Councilor Tracy.
Thank you, President Wright. First, from the Public Safety Committee perspective, we'll be hosting a town hall on living homeless. This month, May 22nd at 6 p.m., we'll be at the Chapel of the Salvation Army. This will not be a formal city meeting in the sense that it'll be warned or we'll be taking votes. This will be a forum for those experiencing homelessness in our community to come in and speak to city officials, so all are invited. This will be primarily a forum for them, not us. But again, May 22nd, 6 p.m. at the Salvation Army. Also, from the Local Control and Licensing Committee side of things, we'll be meeting on June 5th in room 12, I believe, to have a work session on food trucks and how we do food truck policy, not just in our downtown central peddling district, but also throughout Burlington. So we'll be having a discussion about that forthcoming early next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Roof. Councilor Tracy.
Thank you, President Wright. I'm reporting for the Transportation Energy Utilities Committee. Last week we had a very packed agenda for our meeting. One of the items that we discussed came up at our last council meeting, and that was the changes that Green Mountain Transit is making to routes as well as fare issues. They went through, if you don't know, an 18-month process whereby they considered existing routes and considered making changes to those routes. During that process then culminated in a vote around the changes to those routes of their board. And if you don't know, we have representation on that board as the City of Burlington, but we also share that board with several other surrounding communities that are also on that board. So the changes to the routes we found out have already been approved. What is still being considered and discussed, at least as a live topic, and where they're considering feedback and where we're getting indication that they're going to move, is that of the issues of fares, and specifically the College Street shuttle route, and keeping that free. So there's a stated commitment to continue to keep that free. I reached out to Mark Souza, the general manager, and keeping the portion of the College Street shuttle that is currently free will remain. So that's a positive step. I think that there's still an ongoing conversation around whether South Burlington will pick up the additional element of that route that's been sort of added, on whether that will remain free. So that's a decision that South Burlington has to make, because that route will now also include an element of South Burlington as well. So that's, I think, a positive thing based off of some of the feedback we were hearing. We did also hear quite a bit about the CSWD budget, but I won't talk about that because that's on our agenda tonight, and I'll speak there. The North Avenue lighting update, and that much of the work around the crosswalks has already taken place and will continue to roll out as those crosswalks go out. We also heard about the Colchester Avenue bike lanes and paint scheme. If you don't know, Councilor Hanson has been working alongside residents of the old East End, I believe is what they're calling themselves, that neighborhood, to think about changing bike lanes on and adding bike lanes in both directions coming up that steep hill on Colchester Avenue. That won't be before the Public Works Commission this month, but likely will be coming next month. So if you're interested in that issue, pay attention to that. We heard a construction update, and then we did also hear a construction season update, so all the work that will be happening. And then finally, we did also, at the very end of the meeting, get into probably the stickiest and most complicated issue that we had, which was that of the shared mobility, meaning e-bikes and e-scooters, and we felt like we needed a little bit more time with that, and we needed to really dig into the contract for that. So we've scheduled another meeting for next week at 7:30 down at DPW to discuss on the 23rd, so Thursday the 23rd, to continue the discussion around e-scooters and e-bikes. So that's my report.
Thank you, Councilor Tracy. Any other, Councilor Shannon?
Thank you. The Parks, Arts, and Culture Committee met last week, really to kind of review the projects we've been following, which are Memorial Auditorium. The city has been continuing to further develop the costs and search for dollars for the project, and they thought they would have another update for us in July. So the committee will be hoping to get that update when we meet again in July. We also got an update on Moran, which has full council approval at this point. They have HUD funding, and they're expecting to be in the permitting process in June. And as we all know, they need to bond by the end of the year. We also reviewed the infrastructure improvements in Waterfront Park and had some discussion about the Star Farm Dog Park, which we plan to get a further update when we meet in July. The Parks Department is working on some new designs for that park that we're hopeful will address some resident concerns while still maintaining the services for dogs.
Thank you, Councilor Shannon.
Thank you.
Any other committee chair? Hearing none, we'll close that item out and move to item number 6, city councilors on general city affairs. Any councilor who would like to speak on general city affairs this evening? Hearing none, we will close item number 6. And it is 7:21, and I believe that I have enough people signed up to start the public forum a little bit early. We'll go past 7:30. So if everybody's okay with that, so we will open the public forum up. I have a list of people who have signed up to speak. If anyone else would like to speak, there are sheets over here in the corner table. Please be sure to fill one out and bring it over here to the city clerk's office, and they'll get it up to me. You have 3 minutes to speak. And there's a light system in front of you there on the table. When the middle light goes off, you're down to about a minute or so, I think. When the red light goes off, you need to conclude your remarks. And the only thing we ask is we are big on civility, and we are anxious to hear your opinions and as much passion as you want to let us know about, but just no personal attacks, and just keep it positive as much as possible. But with your understandable passion on whatever issue you have. Okay, with that, we'll open the public forum up to Kevin Rogers, I believe that name is. Good evening, Mr. Rogers. Welcome. Nope, either one. To be followed by Charles Messing. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Rogers. I know a lot of you. I've lived in this community for 20, 25 years. I am a practicing physician at the big hospital up the hill in hospital medicine. I've also worked in emergency departments around Vermont for a couple of decades in the emergency department, in urgent care clinics, and otherwise. One thing that a lot of people don't know about me is that I'm also a graduate of the California Law Enforcement Academy, and I served as a federally commissioned law enforcement officer for several years. So I believe these experiences will inform my observations on the recently filed excessive force lawsuit against the city of Burlington and the Burlington Police Department. First of all, the video of the incident involving Jeremy Melley, whose family I know, conflict of interest. I know the family. I've seen him grow up. I believe that video footage documents an unprovoked, unjustified, vicious attack on a citizen in our community. As an emergency department physician, I have seen patients with less severe trauma end up with lifelong disability, paralysis, death. I believe that this represents a sentinel event. That's a term we use in medicine. We've had a death in this community due to physical altercation with police, and now we have video footage of several other episodes. These are very important in the sense that if this pattern continues, I believe that we will be in the national headlines in the same league with Ferguson, Missouri, and other places. It is also not right, I think, that this incontrovertible evidence of excessive use of force, I think a better descriptor is police brutality, that this comes to light only because of an excessive force lawsuit filed a year later, something like that. And so it makes me question the transparency, the information that our police department is providing us as the community members. I feel that the information I have is from 7 days. And if it is accurate, the investigation to date includes a consultant from New Hampshire and a consultant from the Washington, D.C. area, and a review by the Chittenden State's Attorney's Office. And I don't know if our police commission has legal counsel or investigative resources, but I believe that's a completely inadequate investigation. I believe that you are the group that are responsible for civilian supervision of our police department, and that we have a very serious problem as evidenced by these Sentinel events. I believe that the message that the community gets when the officer involved, for example, in the Jeremy Melly case, is administered a brief suspension, tells the community that this isn't important, that this is acceptable. I think it re-victimizes the community members to see this officer in uniform still. And I realize there are complexities around unions and contracts and so on, but I hope that the City Council will step up here and provide adequate civilian supervision of the police department.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Charles Messing is up next, to be followed by, please, Charles Messing, come on up.
Thank you. That's Charlie. I even wrote it today. I wrote it down as
Yes,
Charlie.
you do have it, Charlie Messing.
Sorry, I'm only Charles on bills and checks. Hi, everybody. I'm like more and more familiar. Well, got your name wrong once. Hi, Joan, Chip. Okay, we seem to be doing okay with the bus. That's really good, very important. One of the drivers told me today, all of the buses are going to be 20 minutes now. So, who knows? But there's some great graffiti on there's some awful graffiti on my building. I don't say that because it's graffiti. I say it because the guy is horrible. And I hope a C-click fix, I hope it works. It has in the past. Okay, I wanted to say something about this police thing. I grew up in Brooklyn, and we had guys called hitters. We used to call them hitters. They wore black leather jackets, often you know those black leather sport jackets? They liked those. And basically the idea was that if you said something to them that they didn't like, they would hit you. You could just look at them the wrong way and they'd hit you. And it's a certain psychology, and of course it has to do something with their dads and PTSD from World War II. But I think there are some policemen up here who are thinking with this personal mentality. It's like they think, I mean, a guy gets out of a car and punches the policeman. What does he want? What result does he want? Does well, I think I hope I go to jail. I just don't care. I want to get beat up real bad. I mean, he can't be thinking he's going to take the guy down. He's nuts. The police job is to keep a level head and be a professional, and to realize that the guy didn't hit you. He just hit somebody. And to cool it down can be difficult, but I've seen it in a couple of these things. It's like, you hassling one of my boys, I'll show you. And it can't be like that. You can't take it personal. You got to make sure nobody gets hurt, rather than somebody punched you, so you're going to make sure somebody gets hurt. You have to cool things down. I think it's very important, and I hope everybody can do that now. It's really important. And they know that it's got to happen, because people really don't like this. And they shouldn't. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie Messing. Kenzie Hines is up next, to be followed by Betsy McGavisk. Good evening, welcome.
Hi. My name is Kenzie Hines. I'm going to read the demands of the Black Lives Matter of Greater Burlington with the hope that you will not just listen, but really hear these demands and tap into your humanity. We demand the termination of Officers Corey Campbell, Jason Bellavance, and Joseph Caro from the Burlington Police Department, as they are a threat to the safety of the community. They have displayed a pattern of violence without provocation or just cause, particularly targeted towards Black men. We demand these officers not be rehired by another state or local department or agency in Chittenden County. Their abuse of power demonstrates that they are unsafe and should not be in any position of governmental authority in the county. We demand that all police operating in Chittenden County wear and consistently use body cameras, and that the free release of that footage to the public becomes mandatory. This includes the local police departments, the sheriff's office, and the Vermont State Police that have jurisdiction over towns that do not have local police forces. We demand that the Burlington Police Department halt the hiring of new officers and instead employ more social workers for the community. What our community needs is more support, not more violence. As the police officers of the BPD have shown an inability to de-escalate and insist on violence, their presence does not promote safety in our community. And again, that was written by the Black Lives Matter of Greater Burlington. Policing and police brutality against people of color in this community is a public safety issue. Keeping these abusive powers in place is a cowardly cop-out. Act with courage today and bring accountability to the Burlington Police Department, particularly Chief Del Pozo and the officers mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Well, excuse, please, no, hold your applause. Ask you to be respectful and not applaud. Use the finger signals. Make sure there's more than one. Hand signals, I should call them. I was just reminded. Betsy McGavisk is up here. Welcome. Good evening. And to be followed by Julie Malvina. You have the floor.
Okay, well, hi, my name is Betsy. I'm also here to talk about the recent incidences of police brutality in Burlington that have come to light at the hands of Corey Campbell, Jason Bellavance, and Joseph Carroll. Black Lives Matter of Greater Burlington, like Kenzie just read, has released their 4 demands in response to this. I want to point out that they are the experts on this. These demands represent the needs of the community, the impacted community, primarily Black and Brown community members in Burlington. This is what they have asked for to feel safe in our community. So I hope that you understand that these people are the experts on this. And these demands also take all of the guesswork for you all out of what needs to happen to move forward. They have done the groundwork for you. They've talked to the community members, and this is what they've come forward with. So I'm also just going to read their demands with the hope and expectation that you use your power and influence over the police department to enact them. I hope that you also ask these things like verbatim to Del Pozo when you talk with him shortly. So again, the demands are: we demand the termination of officers Corey Campbell, Jason Bellavance, and Joseph Caro from the Burlington Police Department. We demand that these officers not be rehired by another state or local department or agency in Chittenden County. We demand that all police operating in Chittenden County wear and consistently use body cameras, and that the free release of that footage to the public becomes mandatory. And we demand that the Burlington Police Department halt the hiring of new officers and instead employ more social workers for the community. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Julie. I hope that you will please be respectful and do as you're requested, which is to give the hand signals and not applause. Betsy McGavisk, welcome. You have the floor.
That was Betsy McGavisk.
Oh, you're Julie Masuga? Masuga.
My name is Julie Masuga, and my voice is not the one that you need to hear, but there are too many voices that have been silenced, so myself and others have come. I grew up in an affluent white family, and because of that, I was raised to believe that the police were here to protect me. I heard others cry out about this, telling me that police were there to oppress them, to make them afraid, and to brutalize them. And in my ignorance, I questioned that. How could someone be more at risk just because they were Black or brown or homeless? And I was talking about things that I didn't understand. Do you know what I do understand? I understand the crack of a man's skull that rings in my ears from the body cam footage that has become so famous in our city. To those of you on the council who have been brought up as I have, please take a few moments to consider what it must be like to fear for your life just because you exist in this world. I'm not here to say all cops are bad or that Burlington police don't actually help people. That wouldn't capture all that they do and all the things that I know I could never do myself. But the reality here is that it only takes 16 weeks of training to become a police officer here in Burlington, about 1 semester. And that training covers things like communications in the courtroom, conflict resolution, report writing, laws around alcohol use, evidence collection, interrogation, driving maneuvers, firearms, and non-lethal force. I think they must have forgotten the last one of non-lethal force. But they also forgot how to treat human beings. They forgot how to take more than 3 seconds to assess a situation before crippling someone with empty hands. For those reasons, I support the demands of Black Lives Matter. As we look deeper, we should consider the directives for the use of force, which I will read the first section of verbatim. In determining whether a particular response to resistance, use of force option is objectively reasonable, the officer must consider the seriousness of the offense, whether or not the subject poses an immediate physical threat, whether the subject is actively resisting, and whether the totality of the circumstances justify the officer's response. In the past, I did not listen or research because I did not have to, and for that I am ashamed. But that shame alone does us no good. Our friends and neighbors are dying because those of us with privilege refuse to imagine ourselves in that pool of blood on the concrete in our own neighborhood.
Thank you very much. Trish O'Kane is up next, to be followed by Brian Young. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. I'm here to support the demands of Black Lives Matter and justice for all. The recently released video is horrific. It looks like Burlington's I Can't Breathe moment. It reflects an institutional pattern and not an isolated incident. I teach environmental studies at UVM. Years ago, I worked as a hate crimes researcher at the Southern Poverty Law Center in Alabama. I focused on white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups. In Alabama, I learned that the message that authorities send to the public after racially motivated violence is very important. If you do not take serious and systemic action, this is the clear message you are sending. First, to people of color in Vermont, that they may have as much or more to fear from a police officer they see every day than from a member of a hate group. And secondly, to our college students of all colors that I teach, you are sending the message that the image of a progressive Burlington is a sham and that Vermont is not a good state for young people. Many of my students are deeply upset over the latest news. One of them, a student of color, Christina McLaughlin, testified at the last police commission last week, stating, quote, "1 month ago I was walking down Church Street and I spotted a group of young African American men visibly consoling each other. As I passed them, one of the boys sighed and said, 'My mom didn't send me to Vermont to get frisked by the Secret Service like Finn Brown. She was trying to get me away from all that.' In a climate where existing as a black man can be a death sentence, to hear such a dejected statement about our own police force was deeply disturbing," unquote. This is another student of mine, Kaylin O'Leary, who's African American. She handed in her last paper to the class and it said, quote, "I have had numerous black friends tell me that when they are walking to University Mall, cars pass by them and shout the N-word. They are left scared and anxious that another car will go by and do the same thing, not knowing if the next car will come and the driver step out to do something to them. Something needs to be done so that my fellow black friends and I do not have to worry about being called a racial slur simply for walking while black, so that we do not have to feel the presence of a store clerk watching our every move because of stereotypes. I want the children of color in Burlington to not fear being stopped by the police simply because of the color of their skin. Most of all, I want people of color to feel safe in our own community and feel that our neighbors and police officers have our back," unquote.
Thank you very much. Brian Young is up next. to be followed by Eli Pine. There you go. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Bria. I'm an immigration advocate and ELL teacher in Burlington and Winooski.
Gotta pull the microphone in close to you.
Hi. I'm here because the Burlington Police Department demonstrated a gross use of violence against people in our town and community. And I'm here because they've proven to be the same as so many other police departments that we've seen on videos over a number of years who have committed these acts against people of color and people with disabilities. I'm here because I'm scared for my friend who is black and deaf, and I'm scared that one day he's not going to hear the direction and he's going to be considered a threat because of it. And I'm scared of what might happen to him. And I'm angry that I, at one point, wasn't scared, and I realized that I should have been, and now I am. And I want you to hear the importance of this, because what's happened now, you're in this position where you need to think about what kind of legacy you want to lead as a leader in Burlington, and what kind of legacy you want to leave as someone who has power over what happens to police officers who demonstrate that they want to commit violence against their community members instead of protecting them. People of color and those with disabilities need protection more than white people. And what's been demonstrated is that that's not focused on in the police department. And the police should be particularly focused on their protection instead of brutalizing them, murdering them, and then covering it up for each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eli Pine is up next to be followed by Richard Vaughn. Good evening. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Eli Pine, as many of you know, and I'm here today to speak about the recent police brutality and the culture of white supremacy within the Burlington Police Department. So please raise your hand if you've seen the videos that 7 Days released. All right, I see multiple counselors who have not seen those videos. That is extremely disturbing. After watching those videos, I came to the conclusion that the officers in those videos use unconstitutional excessive force. And yes, Chief, racial bias was at play. The institution of police in the United States derives from slavery and the control of poor and free African Americans. This foundation cannot be ignored and is inextricably tied to the daily actions of police, especially involving people of color. As city councilors, you represent your constituents. That means all of your constituents. And I am positive that one of the greatest concerns of your constituents is the safety and security. So why is it that your constituents, and particularly those of color, do not feel safe in their city? Why is it that you are seeing these videos almost a year after these incidents happened? Ask yourself what you are doing to either perpetuate or dismantle the pervasive culture of white supremacy in Burlington and in the Burlington Police Department. Please take the proper and morally right steps to uphold the demands of Black Lives Matter of Greater Burlington and terminate officers Corey Campbell, Jason Bellavance, and Joseph Carl. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pine. Robert. Richard Vaughn to be followed by the final speaker, Barbara Alsop. Good evening, Mr. Vaughn. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Richard Vaughn, and I'm the owner of Perky Planet Coffee Shop at the corner of St. Paul and King Street here in
Mr. Vaughn, just make sure you pull the microphone close to you so we can hear you.
My wife is a special educator. I'm a former consultant to the hospitality industry, and we opened our store in an effort to provide jobs for people with disabilities, especially those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'd like to chat for a few minutes about the construction project on St. Paul. As you may be aware, it was originally scheduled for 140 days of street closure. It's ballooned to over 300 days now, and frankly, I don't know that our business will be able to survive until the end of it. I've asked many people as to the cause of the more than double timeline for this project, and nobody seemed to have the answer. So I've been working with the city attorney's office through the public records to get some information, including the change orders, site surveys, and other documents about this project. And what I found was, even though the contractors did discover underground storage tanks and other underground structures, Remedying those structures only took 11 of the 150 some odd days going through there. They were able to yank the storage tanks out in 2 days, another 2 days to get rid of them. I was surprised to find out that people were surprised that there were contaminated soils under St. Paul Street. There's a long history of site surveys. There are 4 hazardous waste site or hazardous sites adjacent to that property. The fact that they found hazardous soils should not be a surprise to anyone. Yet I was surprised to find that when this project started in August, it was started with no contaminated soil management plan in place. There was no offsite storage facility lined up for the storage of these contaminated soils, and the storage sewer system was flawed, defective, and had to be scratched. A new storm water system had to be built, or excuse me, had to be designed, approved, and permitted. This process took months, and that's where we are today. Many of the days that are being used now are to deconflict the new stormwater system with the existing utilities. And to me, as a layperson, I don't pretend to be an expert at this. It looks like there is a lack of planning, a lack of oversight, and a lack of accountability. I do not know if my business will be able to survive this, and you may not care, and I'm not here to ask for sympathy. That's fair. However, I think we do have a responsibility to the bondholders, to the taxpayers. We do have a responsibility because it is a hazard to property and lives. St. Paul Street is inaccessible. A fire on that street would burn completely down. There's no way to get a fire truck down there, et cetera. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Barbara Alsop is up next. To be followed by Wei Wei Wong, the final speaker. Good evening, Ms. Alsop. Welcome.
Thank you. First of all, I'm with Charlie Messing. My name, as listed there, is Barbie, not Barbara. And I would appreciate being called by the name.
Barbie Alsop. You got it.
Thank you. I am here on the issue of police brutality, and I support everything that Black Lives Matter is asking for, and I have 2 ideas that I think you might want to consider as ways to ameliorate the problems we're having downtown. First, I propose you create an independent civilian review board for the police, because the people have never been heard about what the police are doing in this city, and I think they ought to. And I think they ought to have investigative powers. I think they ought to be able to see all of the videotapes, and that they ought to be able to insist on various changes in the police department. Other cities have civilian review boards, and they have created better relations between civilians and police, and right now this city needs better relations between citizens and police. Secondly, I think the problems that we saw from the 2 new videos as opposed to the incident that happened at UVM illustrate another problem this city has not faced very well, and I think it needs to be faced now. We have bars in this city that regularly serve people to great intoxication. They are doing it to make money, and they are causing many of the problems that are occurring downtown. Kids whose brains have not completely developed, kids under 26 years old who have their brains are not fully developed. Let's put it that way. Too many negatives. Are drinking alcohol, which is a poison, and they are drinking it to excess because the bartenders will freely pour more and more and more. We've got to stop that. We stopped it back in the 80s when Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, may they rest in peace, pushed this agenda. But we've got to stop the over-serving of alcohol downtown, because that's what's driving so many of these conflicts. I know we have a liquor control commission at the state level, but the city has things it can do too, with licensing and with ordinances making it a violation to serve too much alcohol. I think that is something that would change the culture downtown immeasurably. Couple that with civilian oversight of the police, and I think we're on our way to a better city.
Thank you, Barbie Alsop. The final speaker tonight is Wei Wei Wong. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for saying my name right. So I grew up in the Burlington area. I grew up in South Burlington, and I keep finding myself back here in Vermont despite everything. And why do I keep coming back? Why do so many people of color live here and decide to stay here? We have a choice. We want to be here. This is our home. This is where a lot of us grew up. We want to contribute to this community. We are students. We are families. We are contributing to this community every single day. We are true Vermonters because we endure the 6 damn months of winter and racism every single day. The people of Burlington and the people of color in Burlington have elected you to take care of us. Please do that. I hope that you will hold yourselves and the police department accountable for what has been happening with police brutality and allowing that to persist. I ask that you support the demands of Black Lives Matter of Greater Burlington. The people of color and the people of Burlington are watching. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, that's our final speaker. We'll close out tonight's public forum and move back to item number 3, which is the consent agenda. Is there a motion? Councillor Busher?
Yes, I'll move to adopt the consent agenda and take the actions indicated.
Seconded by Councillor Paulino. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of passing the consent agenda and taking the actions indicated, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And we will now move to the deliberative agenda. And item 4.01 is a presentation by Chief Del Pozo. Good evening, Chief. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Have a clicker for the slides or something? You just advance the slides? Yeah, thank you. All right. So, thank you for having me here tonight. I'd like to thank the council and the mayor for inviting me. I'd like to thank the councilors who reached out and had a lot of very good, informative, thoughtful conversations about policing in the city. I'd also like to thank everybody who came tonight to speak and share their feelings about this matter. You know, it is a very serious matter under consideration, and what we're going to do tonight, in addition to answer questions that the council has, is talk about use of force in the police department, our policies, some of our experiences, and some of our ways forward. And we'll begin. So this first slide is the one of the core principles of use of force from the Seattle Police Department. It is a police department policy that was created in collaboration with the community under consent decree. And I just thought it would be good to begin with to understand how police sometimes view force. They characterize it there in this policy as sometimes unavoidable, and an officer must exercise physical control of a violent, assaultive, or resisting individual to make an arrest or to protect members of the public and officers from risk of harm. It's not meant to reflect on the 2 instances at hand. This is rather the Seattle Police Department, and I think it's a good definition. Their reasoning behind why officers sometimes have to use force. Next slide, please. So when we talk about force for recording purposes and for accounting and analysis, we have a very broad definition, and it's set intentionally low so that we capture as much as we can. It's any physical force used to ensure safety and control beyond compliant handcuffing. So the way to think of that is if you were to issue a verbal instruction and say, put your hands behind your back, and the person did it, you handcuff them, that would not be considered force. If you had to display a weapon, use a weapon, strike somebody, put somebody in a hold, if somebody were to grab their hand away and you were to grab it back, that act is considered a use of force, and we expect officers to report that as an incident in which they use force. So next slide, please. Use of force against officer contacts is relatively rare. This is, doesn't mean that when force is used that it could not be catastrophic or a source of great tension and distrust in the community, but as an event we've consistently recorded it as a relatively rare event. In 2018, there were 30,000 incidents in the Burlington Police Department, and 193 were force incidents, which means they met that broad threshold that I just described before. You can see overall incidents, offenses, arrests, and use of force is those two boxes in the lower right-hand corner. So it's 193 over 30,000. Again, I have to emphasize, this doesn't mean that when use of force is used poorly or in bad judgment or excessively, that it doesn't have disastrous effects on a community. It's just to illustrate that the universe we're trying to reduce is a relatively small universe. Next slide, please. Use of force, as reported by Burlington police officers, has been generally trending down over time. 2016 was a mild winter with a higher than usual arrest rate and use of force rate. But the way to think of this, I see, is that between 2015 and today, we have between 190 and 210 uses of force a year, with that outlier in 2016. Next slide, please. So this is our current policy. I know that some folks were reading it. I wanted to highlight a few features of it. We'll look at other ways we can update or improve the policy. It does talk about de-escalation and verbal commands. It talks about using words and taking actions to stabilize the situation, to allow more time and resources to gain voluntary compliance. It also it talks about acting in accordance with training, and I think this is an important thing to note. It says officers will use contemporary techniques as instructed by certified instructors and/or in accordance with current training and practice, because one of the things we'll be doing is looking at some of our current training and practice, which is what we expect of our officers. Force has to be objectively reasonable, has to be judged from the perspective of an officer based on training, experience, and knowledge at the time of the incident. We also define different types of force. We talk about, for example, when it's inappropriate to use something like a taser or a baton or a firearm. We give guidance in that regard, and we have reporting requirements about how force is collected, maintained, and analyzed. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I just wanted to pull out the de-escalation and verbal commands part of the procedure just for people to get a look at, because I think it's important, and it also bears on the incidents that we're concerned about. Officer presence and verbal commands. We say clearly in our existing policy, officers should use verbal de-escalation techniques when appropriate. Persuasion may occur to show the authority of an officer, either by uniform presence or obvious identification. Verbal and nonverbal commands should be given to direct and let a subject know what's expected of him or her. I think that's a very important thing to note. Subjects should be informed by what authority he or she is being detained, etc. This is also online. You can all find it online. Officers should inform subjects that if they're not compliant, they should say, this is what's going to happen. They should document their verbal orders, investigated detention, or protective custody, and the warnings they've given. So this is what exists now as far as verbal commands, because I know that's been an important topic of discussion. Now, we're going to talk about some of the training that we do regarding de-escalation in the next slide. We do what's called ICAT, which is Integrating Communications, Assessment, and Tactics. It came out of a Police Executive Research Forum trip to Scotland to look at the practices of unfirearmed police departments and how they deal with people in crisis with knives, bats, and other weapons. It was developed in 2016 as a result of a lot of the tumult that was engulfing American policing in the nation then. If you look at their manual, you could see in the lower left-hand corner, I don't know if you recognize that, but that's probably now Cambrian Rise. That is the Burlington Police Department piloting and developing this curriculum for the Police Executive Research Forum. So we were not only the pilot of this de-escalation program, but we also helped develop it. I've taught it in New Orleans and St. Paul. All of our officers have been trained in it, and this year, every police department in the county has become certified instructors in this de-escalation curriculum. So please go ahead. This is that large truck that you've seen around. It's not armored. It's a Ford F-550 Super Duty with a cargo cab. That's the cargo holds inside. This came from the very painful lesson we had when we ended up shooting and killing Phil Grennan in 2016. I've unabashedly said that I see our inability to bring him to therapy safely as a failure of our police department. It was after a 4-hour standoff where he did attack us with knives after we used tasers and they failed. As a side note, I'll be emailing the council. American Public Media Reveal had a 52-minute podcast released 2 days ago about the Phil Grennan incident and about tasers. I think it's a very, very thorough, very honest, fair accounting of this incident, and Burlingtonians interested in our evolution of the use of force may want to listen to When Tasers Fail on Reveal by American Public Media. So what this truck does, we realized in the time of the Grennan incident that we didn't have the right non-lethal equipment to isolate and contain a person in crisis, to make sure they couldn't burst out and confront us, leave via a window, or at least approach them in a way where we had options other than like a taser or a firearm. So we put power tools, shields, ballistic shields, something called a Y-bar, which is like an 8-foot bar with a semicircle at the end that can hold someone at a distance in this truck. One of the things I want to stress about this truck is that...
Hey, excuse me.
No.
Be respectful.
No. I'm sorry, Brian.
Do not do that again, please.
Just say something that's true, and I'll agree. So it doesn't have 40 mil. It has a foam launcher that launches a foam like cylinder at someone that happens to be 40 millimeters. Anyway, so it also has fire extinguishers, which can be used to shoot water at a person to distract them or a dog. And the firearms on this truck are the firearms we already own, pistols and rifles, before we bought this. There's no new firearms procurements associated with this vehicle. It goes to all mental health crises, all barricaded subjects, anybody who's believed to be armed and contained. So how does this work out? What have we done as a result? Here's some clips from the news in the next slide. You know, we had a man in a mental health crisis armed with 2 firearms and a bulletproof vest in the DoubleTree in South Burlington. They called us, we sent our resources, we were able to safely extricate this armed barricaded individual alive. We had a knife standoff in City Hall Park that was captured on film, for example. That was ended peacefully. We had an officer who was being literally ridden down by a robbery suspect trying to escape in a car. Penal law said he would have been able to fire. He did not. The car missed him by a few inches. He went and was able to make an arrest. That officer, Mike Heeman, for choosing not to fire when he could have fired, I gave him the Chief's Award. That's the award we give once a year for the bravest, best cop. And I think it's worth noting, and I said this at our press conference, that a lot of agencies will give a reward for shooting or for using force. That award we gave for a decision not to shoot when a car was barreling down on someone. It's also worth noting that when we had a shooting in front of Nectar's, there was a gunman running from the scene of that shooting, and our officer, as he got out of the car, had the gunman running towards him. He took him into custody without firing a shot. We had a homicide on Hyde Street where officers had surrounded a man with a cleaver who had just cleaved a woman's head open, and there was another woman dying next to him whose life we had to save, and we were able to take that person into custody without using lethal force. So we take these obligations seriously. Next slide. This is just a survey of the use of force training in the police department. This is in response to questions by counselors. They received comprehensive training at the Vermont Police Academy. I know there's a discussion to be had about that. This is each year. They receive 10 hours of scenario-based patrol procedures training involving use of force and de-escalation. They receive 10 hours of dedicated use of force training, which is physical and defensive tactics, 4 hours of CPR and first aid training, 10 to 20 hours of firearms training, and 8 hours of taser training. That's the annual menu for standard training. And then there's also other opportunistic training. This is programmatic. So, next slide, thanks. We've been talking about the opportunity to work in collaboration with the community to update the use of force policy. And I think that it's important to do that. I know that there'll be talk about that. Cities, our use of force policy dates from 2013. Cities have started updating them more recently. New York City, Austin, Seattle. Camden, New Jersey has an excellent draft of a policy. And I think that there's certain tacks that they take that I think are worth pursuing. One is an explicit statement of the core principles and values that the community and the police share in the use of force. Also an explicit statement in the key concepts expressed in training that you want to bring into the policy instead of just train on them. So one of them, of course, is very important, is sanctity of life, the obligation to do everything you can to protect human life, the duty to provide emergency medical care. I think our officers do a good job of providing care. They don't always, and there's situations where they fail, but they do a good job of providing medical care to injured persons, a person alleging injury or someone in their custody. That could be made explicit. And I think very importantly as well, the duty to intercede. We have a procedure that we just passed a few months ago, which makes it unequivocally clear that officers have an absolute duty to forthwith report allegations of misconduct and corruption. And you could argue that excessive force is misconduct or corruption, that procedure covers. I think it would be important nonetheless to put something about the duty to intercede in the use of force procedure as well. These are examples of ways we could update the policy. Next slide, please. This is a lot to read, but I wanted to show you the core values of the Seattle Police Department's policy. You can find them online, but they talk about dignity and respect of rights, the need to, number 2, I highlighted, the need to use de-escalation tactics in order to reduce the need for force. Number 3 is the one I opened the presentation with, that force is sometimes unavoidable nonetheless, and why an officer would use it. Using only the force that's necessary and objectively reasonable. The responsibility for explaining to people and each other the specific facts that led to the force. A department committed to upholding lawful and professional ethical standards. And the 7th one I'm going to end with, so I'll skip it. Next slide, please. This is a breakdown of the use of force in 2018. There's a few things that I left out of this chart. I'll just tell you what they were to be transparent. But this is physical force. Physical force is it would be like a push, a wrestle, a shove, a strike, a kick. There's 84 incidents in which they were used. Empty-handed techniques are like control techniques if you were to put somebody in like an arm lock or something like that, or a escort position, or grab them by the wrist. 55 rather, of pointing a firearm at a person. We had no firearms discharges in 2017 or 2018, but 55 instances of pointing them. 39 instances of using pepper spray and 9 incidences of using a taser. When you add this up, it adds up to more than 193, because an officer might go from an empty hand technique to using pepper spray, might go from pointing a firearm to holstering it and taking out a taser. So when you add all of this up, it'll add up to more than 193. The thing that I left out are pointing pepper spray and pointing a taser. I have that data, but I just thought it would obfuscate the chart a little bit. But there's another few dozen instances of threatening with pepper spray and threatening with a taser and giving commands. But I figured you'd be more interested in using the pepper spray or the taser and knowing the data about that. So this is 2018's breakdown. So I also think that integral to oversight in use of force is a good civilian complaint reporting system. So when I got here, the only way to make a complaint was to either appear at the police station or call the police station. And that's a losing proposition, right? You're a person who feels like you have a grievance with the police, you don't feel safe around the police, but nonetheless you have to talk to a supervisor to make a complaint. I just don't think that elicits good complaints. So we at first put a PDF online where anybody can print it out and mail it in. But then we realized that the better thing to do in 2016 was to have a completely online civilian complaint reporting form.
Excuse me, Chief. Sorry, you've drifted away from the microphone a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Civilian complaint reporting form. Anybody can fill it out with any access to the internet. You can fill it out anonymously or with your name. And when you submit it, you get 2 things. You get a serial number and a unique identifier for the transaction. So you have proof that you've submitted the complaint. Then what we did this in 2017. I'll be candid, when I got here, the police commission had no oversight role in civilian complaints. The police department was trusted to review them themselves. I don't think that's transparent or fair. So what we did in 2017 is every single civilian complaint, the full text is given to the police commission for oversight and review. So that's the civilian complaint reporting system. Typically we get approximately, I'm just thinking over the last 3 years, from about 35 to 45 civilian complaints total. So you may say that people don't have faith in the system, or they think nothing will happen, or they don't trust us, or they don't know about it. If you're in the room and you're interested in police oversight, this is one way to at least attempt it. I'm not going to say that you'll have faith in it if you're one of the people in the room with concerns, but we tend to get 35 to 45 complaints. They range from about anywhere of, say, 4 to 7 force-related complaints. We get complaints also destined for Burlington, Ontario, Burlington, Massachusetts, and Burlington, New Jersey. I've gotten complaints that I'm too cozy with the ACLU, and then we get legitimate rudeness and abuse of authority and profanity complaints. So we will be releasing data about the breakdown of those complaints over the years. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I think is important is to make sure that we have adequate checks and balances in the use of force reporting and review. I think that people need to have faith that if something happens, there's more than one way to oversee it or find out about it. This is not meant to be the final answer for oversight and review, but it's meant to show where we are now. So body camera footage collection and review, number one. Officers are required to film their interactions. They do not have the power to edit or delete their interactions. Once they dock the camera, it gets downloaded. It's likely in many cases that more than one officer will have collected body camera footage in the incident. We see in cases at hand tonight that an initial officer responds and then other officers soon follow. So maybe only one camera captures the initial incident, but others will capture the follow-up footage. All body camera footage associated with criminal charges is turned over to the prosecutor. So what this means is there's an expectation for Burlington Police that if we've made an arrest or taken an enforcement action, that a prosecutor will get the footage. If we don't have footage, it's what's considered what's called a spoliation inference. So if the prosecutor says, my God, there's no body camera footage here for this incident, she will typically see this as a problem with the case, because the expectation is that there exists the footage. There's got to be a reason why you wouldn't have it, and it's not necessarily a good reason. So they get it. But what's also important to note is that all body camera footage is turned over to defense attorneys, whose job it is to advocate to the people who we've subjected to policing. So one of the things in these incidents at hand is I had the opportunity to, not in full, but notify Jessica Brown that we knew about them. She's the head of the defense bar here, that we were looking into them and that we were aware of them. And they have also, for example, we had an officer who was let go for perjury, Officer Christopher Lopez. It was appropriate to fire him. It needed to be done. He shouldn't have been a police officer once he showed us what he'd done. But that was brought to our attention through our body camera footage by the defense attorneys because we gave them the footage. So there is a network of checks and balances in our body camera footage collection and review. As I mentioned before, civilian complaints can be made from any location. They'll receive a unique submission ID number and a complaint serial number, and all civilian complaints are submitted in full to the Police Commission for review. Police Commission guidance and review, that's the other part. I know folks have questions about that, and it may not be as transparent as folks would like, and that's something we'll have to take on. But the Commission receives and reviews all of our complaints. In all of the incidents at hand, they reviewed all of our body camera footage and received investigative updates from myself and our investigators. They advised on all findings for discipline and for the qualitative findings of serious investigations. And then one of the things we have here that they don't have in many states is when an officer seriously injures someone or may have caused a death or, for example, shoots somebody, that we do not investigate that. So I granted the Vermont State Police do the investigation, and people may not think that that's independent enough, but it's the state attorney general who's elected by the people of Vermont and the state's attorney who's elected by the people of Chittenden County that make the investigative decisions about whether to charge us or not. Next slide, please. Next slide. Sorry. No, yes, maybe. We're not done. All right, there we go. So listen, one of the things that's intractable and irrefutable about American policing is it has a disproportionate effect on African Americans. Our use of force is no different. It's no different than our car stops. It's no different than involvement in the criminal justice system in general. And I think there's a real big gap that comes to light when you look at the census estimate of Black Americans in our community. Once you start getting into the descriptions provided to us by people who are victims and tell us who they think the suspect was, or the arrest we subsequently make, or the use of force we use, we see that gap widen. And it widens in a way that I think won't surprise people that are dealing with issues of inequity and race in America. To provide some framing, I put some preliminary data from our arraignment study that we're prepared to release, which is just by way of background. We realize that the criminal justice system is a continuum, that we make arrests, we bring them to the prosecutor, they enter the criminal justice system, they do or don't get sentenced or convicted, and then they do or don't become incarcerated or get probation or parole. We try to collect the best data we can when it comes to what we do on our end in terms of use of force, car stops, et cetera. But there's still a little bit of opacity in the criminal justice system. The Burlington Police Department sent observers to the last 1,000, now it's up to basically 1,700 criminal court arraignments for Burlington defendants. So we have 1,700 arraignments, and we're looking at the judge, the bail, the conditions, whether the person showed up or not, how much bail was set, whether it was a felony, a misdemeanor, the gender of the person, the race of the person, the age of the person. And it's what I'm showing here is how like entrenched and intractable these disparities are. When you look at our suspects, arrests, and use of force, they closely track, for example, a judge's propensity to give bail. Black defendants receive more bail than white or Asian defendants. They're more likely to get bail, 24% versus 20 and 10%. And they're also represented in 32% felony cases versus fewer for white. So I'm not saying that one may cause the other, one may compound the other, but what's clear is that this is a system that disproportionately entrenches Black Americans all the way down the line, including in our use of force, and there's no way around that fact, although we could talk about ways to ameliorate it, and I think that's why the audience is here tonight. Next slide, please. So one of the other questions we've had from counselors is what we do for implicit bias training. I was asked by Mary Guillory Brown when I was trying to get this job why I didn't talk more about training in a meeting at the Peace and Justice Center, and I said if I think we could train our way out of racism, that America would be a utopia and Starbucks would have solved all its problems. But it's not true that training alone does it. That doesn't mean we have an excuse to not train. So when I was looking for implicit bias training, I thought that most of the training that cops get is just basically a pro forma slide deck given by a Vermonter who doesn't have a lot of lived experience, and it just talks about the science of implicit bias. Lori Friedel has a good curriculum that we give, but it can be, to be honest, a little uninspiring. But I was invited to the Obama White House in 2016 to talk about police reform, and I met Dr. Bryant Marks there. He's by far one of the most gifted and amazing implicit bias trainers that I've seen, and he was not cheap, but we were able to use actually Stephanie Seguino secured drug forfeiture money to use to help bring there was a defendant who said, I'll give up my drug proceeds without contesting it if it's used to train Vermont cops in implicit bias. So in 2018, we finally got Dr. Marks to give full training in implicit bias, a one-day course, not just 4 hours, but the full day to all of our officers, plus I believe the city council at the time, plus a public session, plus about 150 other cops in Vermont. So we owe some implicit bias training this year, which I'll talk about in a second. But one of the things I want to say is we also respond, when we make mistakes, I try as best we can to own up to them when we talk about fairness and equity in training. The ACLU sent me a letter saying that we were violating free speech rights with how we were charging disorderly conduct downtown with people of color. My first reaction was, no, you have it wrong. They're very noisy. They're waking people up. This is disorderly conduct. It has a noise provision in it. When I started looking at the law and really reading what Jay Diaz was telling me, I realized that the ACLU was right, that when our officers were trained in disorderly conduct, they were trained just on the penal law language of the law, which talks about noise and it talks about fighting. They were not being trained on case law. And case law in Chittenden County and case law in Vermont goes far beyond just the writing of the penal law to protect Vermonters' rights to make noise. So I told Jay we're right. I assured him that we would retrain all of our officers, and then we had the state's attorney come in and train our officers on disorderly conduct case law rather than just the statute to make sure that they were able to properly charge or to not charge when someone's using speech. The next step for, we have to figure out implicit bias training for this year. I'll just say in passing that I had the opportunity to visit the Lynching Memorial and the Slavery Museum in Montgomery, Alabama with the Vera Institute of Justice, and it was by far the most effective thing I'd ever seen at explaining how slavery begat the terrorism of lynching, begat the terror of segregation, begat Jim Crow, begat incarceration, all the way up till today, and why so many living Black Americans have in their consciousness not only the problems of violence and Jim Crow and incarceration today, but also living memory of lynchings and segregation. And I'd love to bring that sensibility back to Burlington in some way with this round of training. So people talk about the security of minority residents, and I know that that's an issue here tonight, but there are also instances, I'm not minimizing people's concerns about the issues at hand, but we have tried our best to take these things seriously. In a state where we have legislators, Black legislators, quitting office because of racial harassment, where people feel like we always say free speech is what it is, we can't do anything about it. We've tried to honor free speech and make harassment cases wherever we can. So back in 2015, we had 2 women of color who got flyers for the Klan left on their mailboxes. And a lot of people said, hey, that's a free speech issue. We actually, in a very thorough investigation with no leads except 2 pieces of paper, were able to figure out who did it, arrest that person, and charge them with a hate crime. I'll tell you, the ACLU actually had that case overturned, and we lost that conviction. But that was our attempt to say that we will see what the law allows us to do to protect the security of black Vermonters. On the left, we have Christopher Hayden. He has been racially terrorizing everybody, including black Vermonters, for as long as he's been at a keyboard. We've been bringing case after case against him with the cooperation of as many people as we can, including people in this room. This was a case that people say couldn't be made, but we were willing to try to make it. And lastly, last year in the middle, when Black Lives Matter students at UVM felt that their voice wasn't being heard by the administration, they shut down traffic on Main Street for hours to protest. It was an unambiguous, unpermitted violation of Vermont law. It delayed ambulances getting to the hospital. And the #1 civilian complaint by theme in 2018 was Vermonters complaining that we should have arrested all of them. We didn't, right? I felt that their voices needed to be heard, that they were being very respectful, that they had a good point to make, that they tried to communicate with their administration, and this was the next step, and there were no arrests coming out of that. So this is not just me. It's not just, the middle one was my decision, right? But these other 2 were my detectives making those cases and pressing those charges. So this is a collaborative effort from my police department. Next slide, please. We'll just have a few more slides, and then we'll be done. Talking about use of force, I think it's important to note with the issues at hand, use of force occurs, if you look at the time distribution and the location, the predominantly downtown, predominantly between 11:30 and 1:30, and it predominantly is related to the bar scene. When Barbie Alsop spoke about properly enforcing liquor laws, I think that's a great point. That's something that actually came up with the frustration that a lot of our cops had over the summer with drunken disputes and fights. So we are looking into that. We will have more data, but this is the type of analyses that we do. Next slide, please. The other thing I want to remind folks of as we come to a close is that one of the things I've heard is, and this is not to justify the force used, especially in the case of Mr. Melly, but they say, you know, it's just drunken behavior, it's just people doing their thing. You know, the police don't always see it that way. Like, these are relatively rare cases, but we see the potential for fights and disputes, especially around the bar closing hour, to turn harmful and deadly. And when a police officer thinks why he or she should or shouldn't intercede, half of that officer's thinking this is just like drunken behavior, it might not come to anything. But there are 2 disputes that linger in our memory that resulted in a homicide and a bystander being shot at exactly this time frame, all within about a block from each other, around the same fact pattern of people just having a dispute that was allowed to continue. So we do want to stop disputes from becoming homicides and shootings. They are a problem in our community that we have to protect people from. Next slide, please. So this is the last part of the Seattle principles of the use of force, and I think it's really an important thing to realize why we're here tonight. And it was an aha moment for me when I read it, looking at use of force policies that were more recently revised. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it. But a strong partnership between the department and the community is essential for effective law enforcement and public safety. And then this next part, I think, is very telling. It says, uses of force, even if lawful and proper, can have a damaging effect on the public's perception of the department and the department's relationship with the community. And that's true, right? I mean, if you look at the Phil Grennan shooting, that was a man's life who we took, and it was lawful and proper, but it had a damaging effect on the public's perception of our community. When you look at force, for example, in the case of Mr. Melly, I found that that force was unnecessary and unreasonable and accorded a suspension for it, and that was tremendously damaging to our community. So both the department and individual officers need to be aware of the negative effects of use of force incidents and empowered to take appropriate action to mitigate these effects. What we owe you is explaining these actions to subjects and members of the public, offering reasonable aid to people who we use force on, treating people, bystanders, the subjects themselves, everyone, with professionalism and courtesy, and department follow-up with neighbors, family, and the community to explain our actions and to hear concerns and feedback. What's notable about this policy and others is it was developed in collaboration with the police and the government and the community. And I think this is like I think this sums it up really well going forward. So that's, next slide. that's the end of my slide presentation. Thank you.
Well finished, Chief.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, President Wright. Thank you, Chief Del Pozo, for that, I think, much-needed, detailed presentation. I want to thank everyone else who's come out to be part of this conversation tonight. I think it's a really critical one for our community, and I'm glad you are all here for us to have this and engage it. I want to start by acknowledging that the past few weeks have been challenging for the community and for our police department. I empathize with the anguish and the anger felt by those whose family members have been hurt in recent police incidents, and I understand why the public in general and people of color in particular have been unsettled by the videos and the images that have been released regarding these incidents. You know, we put a lot of effort and intention into trying to signal that we are an inclusive community that welcomes people of all backgrounds and certainly all sexual orientations and genders and races, and it is troubling to be here tonight and to understand the way in which these incidents have set back that effort. As public officials charged with both supporting and overseeing our police, we have a need to try to both recognize and respond to the pain and the anger these incidents have sparked, to understand the implications they have for our policing effort, and to chart a course forward. To that end, I would like to take a step back from the events of the past few weeks for a moment and remind us of where we were in the summer of 2015, which is the last time we had a major discussion at this table about the future of Burlington policing. That summer, we had the task of hiring a new police chief in the middle of a watershed year in American policing. On the heels of terrible tragedies in Ferguson and Baltimore and Cleveland and elsewhere, President Barack Obama created a task force on 21st century policing and charged it with, quote, identifying best practices and offering recommendations on how policing practices can promote effective crime reduction while building public trust. The release of the task force final report in May of 2015 exposed a deep rift in the leadership of American law enforcement among those who believed that little change was needed and those who believed that extensive reform and re-engineering was critical. I knew at the time where Burlington stood in that debate, and I think stands today, and when I appointed Brandon Del Pozo in July of that year, just a couple months later, I asked the council to confirm him, in part because I knew he would be a reformer who built on the already strong foundation of the Burlington Police Department, a foundation that had been built by generations of strong leaders and committed officers. I wrote to the council in advance of that vote that, here's what I wrote. I said, we are in the midst of an important and difficult national conversation about the future of policing in America and what changes to our practices are needed. The BPD, with its long-standing commitments to community policing and public engagement, is well ahead of most communities in addressing this challenge. However, as in all American cities, we have more work to do to protect public safety and maintain public trust in the years ahead. With Del Pozo, I am confident we have found an individual who has thought deeply about the challenge of providing public safety while prioritizing and protecting the rights of our residents. After a considerable debate, the City Council agreed with this sentiment and unanimously confirmed Chief Del Pozo in July of 2015. I think the report that we've just seen from the chief acknowledges, it's quite a candid report in a lot of ways, and certainly acknowledges that we are a department that has its challenges, but I think at the same time it describes progress and provides considerable context to the incidents that have been the focus of our attention in recent weeks. I'm hopeful. I think the report should reassure the community that we were right to place our confidence in this chief and right to have faith in the men and women who wear the BPD uniform. I believe it to be the case that few police departments in the country have made comparable progress on these challenging policing issues over the last 3.5 years. At the same time, a central focus of the 21st century policing is trust. The report opens with these words. It says, trust between, again, I'm talking about the President's report back in 2015. It says, trust between law enforcement agencies and the people they protect and serve is essential in a democracy. It is the key to the stability of our communities, the integrity of our criminal justice system, and the safe and effective delivery of policing services. While the chief has demonstrated that the incidents that we've been focused on in recent weeks are certainly not representative of the type of policing we attempt to instill and lead, and I don't believe it is, as this chart shows, representative of our broader policing efforts. These incidents have nonetheless damaged the trust between the police and this community. As a result, in the weeks and months ahead, I think we have to come together and find a way to achieve two interrelated goals. One, to repair that trust between the community and the police, and two, to continue advancing with our important work of progressive policing agenda that makes this community both safer and more just. To that end, I propose, and the administration will fully embrace and support, a focused and well-designed public engagement process going forward from tonight. While there are numerous details that we need to sort through with the council to get this engagement process right, my sense is that such a process should be guided by these four principles. Number one, the process should be led by a group that represents the whole community. We should create a group to lead this effort that includes the administration, the city council, and the police commission, but also community advocates and representatives of communities of color. Two, the police need to be included as an essential partner in this effort. Little long-term change in policing culture or practice is possible without buy-in and support from the men and women who put their lives on the line for this city. Three, the process should look broadly at our critical policing issues. Certainly, there's been a lot of focus in the last couple of weeks on the use of force policy, and that should be reviewed and discussed, but I don't think it should stop there. I think we should also review officer training, information disclosure policies, which I think has been at the heart of some of the anger about how these incidents played out, civilian oversight structures, and officer wellness initiatives should also be considered. And fourth, finally, this engagement process must be supported with resources and expertise. To ensure an effective process, we should include professionals who have successfully helped other cities complete public engagement efforts, and we should make sure that we appropriate sufficient funds to complete this work in a timely and professional manner. Again, getting this process designed right and started on the right foot will require, I think, considerable discussion and coordination among different members of the community and between the administration and the council. I look forward to engaging the council in the days ahead about this, and I hope that we can reach consensus on a path forward that will make the community safer and more united. Thank you, President Wright, for the opportunity to...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we'll now open it up to questions from the City Council for the Chief. We'll start with Councilor Roof.
Thank you, President Wright. Excuse me. Thank you, President Wright, and thank you, Chief, for being here. First, just a note, can we make sure that this presentation gets up on board docs, and when it's made available, the link to the Channel 17 video would be good for more people to be able to see and hear what we just went through. I have a lot of personal reflections on what your statement included in the report that you gave, which I'll hold for now because I think I'll just stick to one or two questions. But what I think is most apparent from what I just heard was that we need, as not just a council, but certainly as a community, what's going to be required is much more time and a more robust forum to unpack this and to chart a course forward towards what I think we are all hoping for is substantial change for the betterment of all. I think that there's enough common ground to build upon here in creating this much needed forum, doing it in a timely manner, as well as dedicating necessary funds to do it the right way if necessary. The public can expect that a resolution is being worked on actively by members of this council, and it looks like in partnership with the administration as well, in hearing that statement from the mayor to come for next Monday. I think that there is an appetite for us not to move with too much haste, but with urgency, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to get a resolution for the docket for next Monday. Chief, I do have one question, and it is specific to the incidents from the videos. And so legal counsel, just keep the reins on if you need to. How was the conduct of these specific officers reviewed? Who was involved in that process, and what policies and procedures caused the public release of the videos not to occur only recently? And understanding that these are under litigation, maybe just an aggregation of public information might be helpful to better understand this process.
I think you can definitely talk about who's involved in this decision and other decisions. So why don't you start there?
So once the incidents came to our attention and it was immediately clear that they required review, we alerted the police commission, we meaning myself and Deputy Chief Wright, and then when Deputy Chief Mira joined himself as well. Just as an aside, there's like some tendrils. We sent the videos out to our use of force team to take a look at, but they don't have investigative authority or authority to draw conclusions. But we realized that we could conduct this investigation ourselves, but they were fairly serious. So we brought them to the attention of the state's attorney. The state's attorney made it clear that she was not pressing criminal charges. If she were to say, for example, with the Corey Campbell case, they're looking at that. We don't conduct an investigation until they're done with that, right? But once they decline to consider it a criminal matter, we're clear to investigate. So at that point, show the body camera footage to the commission, prep them on what we're doing. At the same time, we hired an investigator from New Hampshire to come in and do the questioning under our guidance, to interview people, to lay out, to be a finder of facts. Then we also hired a use of force expert from Maryland to take a look at the fact pattern as well and apply it to what he knows about tactics, defensive tactics, use of force in the law. Then from that, we brought those findings to the commission. We were in conference with the city attorney, with human resources, with the commission about findings and discipline. And then once we have consensus about findings and discipline and I make the final decision, we write the finding and administer the finding. Does that make sense? Yeah.
That does make sense, and over the last week or so in talking with constituents, that narrative has not been clear, and so I appreciate that, because I will, as a good forum to communicate that, and I will carry that forward to help people better understand at least the process that went
And you
into
had a
the
question about
determination.
disclosure, some of the timeline for disclosing things?
Good catch. There was a part of the question asking what policies and procedures were involved in the delay, some would call it, in the delay of the video being released.
No, listen, so we've talked about this before, but it's worth answering in front of the full council that there's a long-standing policy in the city to keep personnel matters confidential. Of course, once something becomes a lawsuit, it brings it out into the public. But, listen, especially the footage from Mr. Melly, like people recoil, police recoil when they watch that. I recoil. I'll just say this once, I've broken my skull, and hearing that sound terrifies me. And so just imagine, I knew that when the public saw this footage that there would be anger and outrage and an accounting, and I knew that in September. And I'm not asking for any sympathy, but understand that, like, going to work and dealing with this case and debating whether to put it out or not, and just knowing that it's there and that a lawsuit will come, and that every day you wait you're going to be criticized more for withholding, is something that we were dealing with for 8 months, and I don't take that lightly. I think we need to address when we release these things, and I will say it's done in a, and we knew they weren't going away. It wasn't like we could just run the clock on this and there'd be no lawsuit. It was clear. We had attorneys in contact with us. This was going to be made public. And it was like waiting for a shoe to drop in a very uncomfortable way. And I think one of the important things we need to do as a city is to reconcile like long-standing personnel policies that apply to every department with our legal obligations, our human resources obligations, and the need for the public to know about policing matters that really affect their trust.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Roof. Councilor Pine, then Councilor Busher, and then Councilor Jang. Councilor Pine.
Thank you. I think it's important that we recognize the critical relationship between the community and law enforcement, in that the phrase protect and serve is not just a phrase. And I believe you take that very seriously, and I believe your officers do as well. However, given all the efforts you've made and what I think is pretty exemplary approach to dealing with this issue, what's going on? Why do we keep failing as a community in this way? What is at the heart of what's happening? I'd really like to hear your candid remarks about that.
I think that it's hard to say too much that won't bear on the litigation, but I will say it's worth noting that, you know, we have an issue again, right, with body camera footage and an autopsy regarding the Kilburn incident, where we're under unambiguous instructions from the state attorney general, to withhold that information or only view it in executive session. But I think you'll find like the difference between the September incidents and that incident sort of like qualitatively different. You'll be able to judge that at the right time. But when we're looking at these two September incidents, when I talk to the cops out there, there's a lot of drunken disorder. There's a lot of fighting going on. Ironically, we were training our cops up on that truck that I showed you that made us very shorthanded, and officers, because they were out for training, were working shift after shift after shift on a warm summer with a lot going on. And, you know, people wonder if there's bias or racism. Like, you know, this is not the forum to address that. But I felt in some cases, at least, the officers working the evening shift at the bar scene were getting like pretty cynical and worn down about their work and like very impatient. And I think that there's a wellness component to that. That's not meant to absolve a blame or say that's the answer. But if I can give you one answer I can discuss tonight, it would be that.
Okay, so I guess the next question I have, and maybe this is crossing the line, but I'm just going to at least ask it because I just can't not ask, is there a provision in our contract that makes the disciplinary procedure as sort of constricted and sort of prescriptive and doesn't allow for the punishment to fit what looks like to be the offense? It feels like it's really disproportionate when the guys who got penalized or punished for the stolen beer got a longer punishment than the officers involved here.
So, Chief, I think...
Whoa, please don't do that. Show respect for the process.
Chief, I think that's one you probably should not answer in public session. In comparing the disciplines and talking about how
Excuse me. We listen to all of you, and I would expect you to show respect for the city attorney when she's speaking, and the chief as well. Please.
I don't think you should speak in public session about how the city goes about making disciplinary decisions. That at this stage, there is a lawsuit pending at the moment. There are 2 lawsuits pending, and this is a matter that also involves how we negotiate with the union on an ongoing basis and how we deal with them on an individual basis. I think it's an absolutely great topic for you all to discuss in executive session with the chief and get a real understanding of what happens and how those things are made. But in public session, I would strongly recommend against.
Let me ask if I could, Mr. President, the general concept of constraints that are contained in our contract, and not getting into the specifics, but I believe the contract does tell us what we can and can't do as a city in terms of disciplinary actions. And you have said that we need to work on the policies, procedures, and perhaps training to ensure that use of force is consistent with our values and with best practices, and I think you've made that statement. Is there something we need to do about the way we handle discipline in our force going forward?
I think that the conversation should be centered around, my opinion, is distinguishing between what's in the contract and what is a matter of the city's interpretation of labor law. And there's 2 components to that. So if we see labor law a certain way, I think we have leeways or prerogatives that we may not believe we have now, or that's, I think, a matter for the city attorney to look into. And then there's the matter of how the contract proceeds. And then there's, frankly, the issue of progressive or escalating discipline. I'll be candid, when I got here, I found that suspensions were infrequent and relatively light, and that the use of force suspensions prior were surprisingly short. And so what you've seen, if we can discuss in the right quarters, is actually like a broadening and a escalation of the amount of discipline that we've imposed, but it can't just, like a rocket ship, completely break with precedent. And I'd also point people towards something that I actually think is quite useful, but we may consider having. The Vermont State Police have a very specific set of guidelines for all their different types of misconduct and corruption, and the guidelines for the penalties, first offense and last offense. And it talks about property-related offenses versus force-related offenses. And I encourage you, not saying too much here, but to look at that. Like, their guidelines could be illuminating, and they are public.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, Councilor Pine. Just one comment before we go to the next counselor. We've heard what the city attorney said about the lawsuits, so councilors need to keep that in mind. The public also needs to understand that there are 3 individuals who have lawsuits in this case, and we need to be respectful of those lawsuits and not be saying anything to prejudice those cases. So with that, Councilor Busher is up next, to be followed by Councilor Jang.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I have a couple of comments or questions regarding some of the comments you gave when other counselors asked questions. The expert that came from Maryland that you referenced, did that person have an affiliation with a police department? Was that a police officer, or was that someone outside of policing?
He's actually a lieutenant in the Baltimore Police Department in charge of their tactics section, and he's the person who we went to when we were looking to investigate the Vermont Police Academy for using force on its recruits. He's the person, you've seen that. That is an investigative report that was issued publicly, and that's in the public record, and he's the author of that report, and he's the one we used.
The person from New Hampshire, was that someone also affiliated with a police department?
Not at the time, no. He's a retired licensed investigator, licensed to work in Vermont.
Okay. Thank you. Another, just a comment, you know, you talked about the summer and people training people on the emergency response vehicle and how other people were working a lot of hours to allow that training to occur. I know my life was, for a long time, was at the hospital, and when I first started, physicians worked like continuous, like 24, 36 hours, but it then became clear that no one makes good decisions when they're working too many hours in a row, and so I don't know how many hours these individuals worked, but I'm certainly interested, and you don't have to respond now, but in wondering if we need to look at limiting the number of consecutive hours people work, because people do burn out and then are tired and don't make as good decisions. So that's just a comment. When somebody is disciplined, someone is disciplined in general, if it's because of use of force, is there a psychological evaluation in addition to just a suspension?
So that's a great question. All officers are given a psychological evaluation to get on the police force. Of course, if they're hired in their early to mid-20s, you might say that they're still developing psychologically, and they could change by the time the incident happens. We don't send them for like a psychological evaluation, I think, in the sense that you're suggesting, but we do send them to a licensed clinical social worker for like a counseling session, but I don't think it's the evaluation you're talking about. And one thing, because listen, it's clear to me when I say that I hired an investigator from Baltimore, people are rightly thinking like that's not the best police department to have an investigator from with their use of force record. That gentleman is, I met him through his commitment to de-escalation training and the Police Executive Research Forums program. He's actually one of those instructors. So I was comfortable with his track record as a force investigator. Baltimore was not meant to be an endorsement.
So I'm going to be really honest with you. You know, one of the criticisms we all hear, and you hear too, is that police self-investigate and they don't look outside of themselves. And so that's why I was asking the question. I wasn't trying to, but I wanted to understand it better, because I think that that's something that in this process needs to be thought about and evaluated. But I have some other questions for you or information that I'd like as this process moves forward. You talked about 2015 to 2019 with the decrease of use of force incidents going from 350 or so to 193 or whatever. But would we be able to understand how many of those in that continuum of time resulted in serious injury?
Right.
Because I think that's also key. I just would really like to know that. And you don't have to answer right now unless you want to.
So I don't have the precise numbers, but I'm saying up to, when you say serious injury, that would take a further investigation because it's very, very few. And our standard for injury is presumptive. We don't want to be in a position where somebody's injured and we've denied the fact that they're injured. So if they say they're injured, if there's like a scratch, a contusion, a bump, redness, swelling, or substantial and persistent pain or any type of bleeding, we always mark it as injured. But to get to what we define, we could talk about what serious is and then get you an answer for that.
So I guess I'd be looking at serious/permanent damage or injury, so something that would be sustained. The individual would not be able to fully recover from is what I'm looking at.
We'll
yes.
get that for you.
The other thing is that you mentioned, the body camera footage, and it does get reviewed when there's a complaint. You mentioned that. But I just wondered if indeed every officer that wears these and should be wearing them, if somebody plucks like 3 of I don't know how long the films last, I don't know how long you keep them, but if you would evaluate over a year's time each individual, like 3 scenarios, because maybe what's going on isn't being reported. Maybe the altercation would cause you to pause if you saw something, but it's not being reported. And I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, but I am trying to give you the power or the information to understand the people that you work with and understand scenarios that you may use in further training to say this or that about. So does that at all happen, random selection of these?
So my understanding of when the Burlington Police Department went to body cameras in the year or two before I got here, the union's concern was it was a fundamental change in work practice to suddenly have to film everything you're doing all the time. And they were requesting, and please correct me if I'm wrong, to reopen the union contract, to renegotiate it based on, to seek additional compensation and other terms based on having to wear cameras. And I believe, this is my understanding, and if I'm wrong, Vermont Digger will be on it with a false fact check, but that one of the means by which we could have the cops wear cameras without renegotiating the contract is to prohibit like the random screening of their body camera footage. You have to be directed towards it for a reason and not just plucking footage out. That was one of the ways we were able to get the body cameras on the cops without renegotiating the contract. That's persisted in the contract. One of the I don't know how many years it's off technologically, but Axon's biggest investment is in artificial intelligence. Some of it has privacy implications that everyone in the room, including me, will have issues with, like facial recognition. I'm not talking about that. Another thing that they're looking at is having software in the body camera that will notice when an officer's behavior is escalating, notice when an officer has been involved in a fight, notice when something's changed about the officer's behavior, and then put that into like an early intervention or a review category. So that's a few years off, but that's the future of this.
That would be very useful. The last thing that I wanted to say is that ultimately it starts off with someone wanting to be a police officer and getting trained. And people have talked about that that's a very short period of time. I can't really speak to that. I don't know whether it is, but I think it's really important for this conversation to also be heard by those that train all of you, and make sure that that training around force and excessive force is updated if it needs to be, because I think, you know, it starts with training, and then the annual review about de-escalation and use of force is really key. I think that's all I'm going to say. Other people have asked some other key questions, but I think I need more information, and what I'm hoping is that, as the mayor said and as Councilor Roof also commented, that this meeting, this group that's going to form really needs to be weighted with a number of citizens, because they need to feel like their voices are heard directly. They're coming to us, but they want to be empowered also, and I want to make sure that happens.
Thank you, Councilor Busher. I have Councilor Jang, Hanson, and Tracy. Councilor Jang is up next.
Thank you, Chief, for being here.
Thank you.
And hope that all of these officers that are here are not on the payroll, because I don't know what we're doing here right now. You know,
Listening.
it's good, but getting paid to listen.
It's their profession.
Right. That's one example of what I want to talk about. So you started, Chief, by saying that thank you for the city councils who reach out to you. And I think that's the first thing that I feel like is problematic. We are elected officials. We were elected by the voters of this city to represent them. Something happened in this city, you did not reach out to any of us. To any of us. It doesn't matter the nature of the offense, it doesn't matter the nature of the incident. It was your role to reach out to people to say, hey, this is a heads up. Something happening in the city, I'm telling you right now. And even, let's sit down as an executive so that you give people update. You failed to do that. 8 months this incident took place. We didn't know. We elected officials. No one knew about this, and it is embarrassing to hear this from the media. Very embarrassing. And I don't know, this is a republic or this is a democracy. You failed in that aspect. Second, you talked about here the example of Seattle. Can you please remind me, when were you hired, Chief, in Burlington?
2015.
2015. Since then, how many people died because of police used force? How many, on top of your head?
There's one, and one is pending.
How many?
One, and one is pending investigation.
Okay. So the one that took place, maybe I don't know when, 4 months since you joined the office. Did you look into the police use of force policy or try to change it then?
We embarked upon one of the biggest programs of altering the way we respond to people in mental health crisis undertaken in American policing.
I can't hear you.
Chief, can you pull the microphone back in a little closer?
We engaged in one of the biggest overhauls of response to people in mental health crisis ever in American policing.
So you did?
We engaged in a program that immediately would change the way we responded to people in mental health crises on the ground.
Okay. So
that's not the policy, Counselor, I understand, but we did not fail to act.
Yeah, I'm talking about your work you did as the person responsible of this safety institution.
Right.
Like the management and operation of the safety institution of this city.
Right.
What work have you done when someone died under your tenure to update the use of force policy? And the podcast you're talking about, I listened to it. And I listened how you go to your home, brought the cameras, and you waited only 4 hours. I think when we talk about the life of a human being, a life of a person, a life of an individual, right? We should wait 48 hours in making sure that this person will be safe and no one will get hurt. 4 hours, right? I think to me, it is problematic. But I want to get to this. You joined the office, 4 months, somebody died under your tenure. We did not change the use of force policy. That's one. Second, this incident we're talking about, by the way, the families and those boys who were included in this, I am sending you my sincere apologies of what happened to you. It is not fair and it is not just that we did not even know about this. I send you my sincere apologies. This incident happened 8 months ago, right? Did you change any policies before even we learned about it? Did you look at the use of force policy and make some changes?
It would be helpful in answering your question if we could understand the manner in which you think like unilateral policy changes would have affected this outcome. We have pointing to areas here where I said officers are instructed to use verbal commands. They're instructed to give people an opportunity to comply. They're instructed to explain what they'll do if somebody doesn't comply. All of that was in the existing policy, and it was what we used to find fault in the incident. Just our existing policy in the case of Mr. Melly was adequate to find fault in the conduct of the officer. What we're talking about is the community understanding our core values and our use of force, and understanding what we want to emphasize and bringing things. And we also have, as I said, in our policy, you are expected to act in accordance with your training. So what we'd want to do is bring explicit aspects of our training into the policy, but I'll say again, the policy was adequate to find fault in the case of Mr. Melly as written.
Okay. And at the same time, during one of your the press release or, meeting with the press, you did mention you tasked your chief operating officers to look at the policy. Right. So that means then you did not do it back then when this incident took place. Is that accurate?
What, the Mr. Grennan incident, the shooting when I first got here?
I mean, not Mr. Grennan. I'm talking about the recent press release that you did with the media. You did mention that you are tasking Mr. John Murray to look into the use of force policies. I think you mentioned that. Did you mention that?
Yes.
Okay, so I think maybe people are trying to put the things together, the dots together. My point is, someone died, use of force policy did not change. An incident happened, use of force policy did not change, no policy change did happen. And that resulted to another person died again, very recently in March or April. And still, this is right now that we are talking about what we're going to do from here. I think it is imperative as elected officials to not undermine what took place. I am not interested in hearing that maybe, these officers they worked over 8 hours. I am not interested in all of that. And Chief, what I want to hear from you is this: why should I trust all of the data you provided here today? Why should I trust that? Is it accurate?
No. The chief is going to be given an answer now. Chief, do you have to respond to that?
In terms of the use of force data?
All the data you provided here today.
We audit this data. We've been able to, it'll be open for review. We'll tell you the means by which we collect it, the means by which we audit it. We have a data analyst that looks for flaws in the data. And this, no data is perfect. That's not a way of intimating that this is troubled data. There will always be a missed incident or a misreport. When our car stop data, we speak with Professor Seguino, we acknowledge that there's a certain % of stops that always go unrecorded. But, there comes a point where if we're getting civilian complaints or lawsuits or defense attorneys that are coming to us with serious injuries that don't correspond to what we have in our reports, then we have a problem, but we're not getting that incongruence right now.
So I think I'm going to finish with this. This is a statement that I wanted to make. Basically, it's a resolution, and I think it will, when it's ready, I'll introduce it here. In Burlington, we are fortunate to have a law enforcement agency that does not lack legitimacy, that does not lack resources to conduct its basic function of protecting and fairly serving citizens. And I mean all citizens of the city. Our law enforcement agency, the Burlington Police Department, is the largest law enforcement agency in our state, and it has a chief of police. Chief Del Pazo was appointed by the mayor and the council June 2015. Your primary role as a chief, Del Pazo, is to ensure the ongoing management and operation of the department and delivering the department core mission, the vision, and of protecting the core values of integrity, respect, safety, and creativity of our department. The chief of police department must have a proven track record of working effectively in an urban environment with a culturally and ethnically diverse community. It is expected from our chief to lead in a way by providing adequate needed trainings for members of the police department, de-escalation trainings, consistent training around bias, consistent. I'm not talking about one that took place in February 2008, one time. It is expected from our chief of police in collaboration with our city attorney and the city council to update and strengthen internal policies such as the use of force policy and hold all members of the police department accountable of their actions, their conduct that are not aligned with the department's policies. I'm going to say this right now. The issue is not the officials involved. The issue to me is the leadership that we have in place. And I'm going to tell it right now, you did not bring a letter of resignation to the council. But I'm telling you right now, when you are going to be appointed, I will vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Jang. Chief, did you have anything you wanted to respond?
No.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Hanson is up next, to be followed by Councilor Tracy.
Thanks. I have a few different ones to cover. One is around the body camera footage. I'm sure you heard a number of members of the public and Black Lives Matter Greater Burlington's demands. One of them was around body camera footage. I just wanted to clarify, so do all officers film all interactions through body camera footage at present?
Every officer is issued a body camera when they're conducting interactions with the public, not like giving directions or saying this is where OGE is, but any substantive interaction with the public, especially about enforcement, must be filmed, yes.
Must be filmed, okay. And in terms of the public release of that footage, what is the policy there? In this particular incident, could you have legally released the footage sooner? And in general, what is the policy for releasing footage to the public?
So when something is under criminal investigation, either because the officer is being investigated, like in the Kilburn incident, or even when, for example, Mr. Melly or Mr. Jock had charges pending, it's the state's attorney's assertion that she does not want the footage released until the criminal charges are done, or the decision is made to charge or not charge. So in Mr. Jock's case, for example, that was April 12th of this year. In Mr. Melly's case, it was prior to that. But the first answer to your question is if there's pending, if there's an active investigation, again, in the case of Mr. Campbell and Mr. Kilburn, or there is a criminal case going on, the state's attorneys and the state attorney general's prerogative is to not release the footage. Nonetheless, it is our footage. But our understanding is that we do abide by their request.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So, but once they've completed that investigation, there's nothing holding you back from releasing that footage?
Yeah, and the other thing too is that the defense, so this body camera footage was obtained by the plaintiffs from the defense attorneys. So once a defense attorney has the footage, he or she can give it to whomever, and they can do whatever they want with it. So that's one of the ways it got into the possession of the plaintiffs at this time.
So why did you not release this footage, especially knowing that it was going to make it out anyways, just as a way to build trust with the community and kind of show that accountability?
That's the issue we have to solve. When I say that, that's a great question. Like, there's been a lot of internal discussion about that, and Councilor Dang, for as much as I disagree about some of what he said, he's right about saying, why did this take 8 months for us to hear about? It seems like it was just stalling, and I think that the city attorney, myself, the council, the commission, we have to come up with guidelines by which we release this body camera footage. That is like a crucial issue here about public trust. You're exactly right.
So I think that raises a good point, that that demand of Black Lives Matter Greater Burlington was a good one, and I definitely plan to support that. So another question, I just wanted to get back to the disciplinary component of it. So we have this use of force policy that does promote de-escalation, which I think is good. I think there's consensus here that that policy was violated in this case of Mr. Mele, at the very least, if not in other cases. But at the very least in this case, you have said that it was violated. So I want to understand what happens in the case of a violation. It sounds like there's a huge problem with transparency around that, but I think that is a big component of the policy, is how is that policy actually enforced when it's broken?
So in general, and I can't speak about the case of Sergeant Bellavance, but when we know we have a policy violation, I consult, there's a few things, but not in any particular order of importance, the city attorney, human resources, and the police commission about what the appropriate penalty would be, what the precedent is, what the liabilities of various penalties or not giving them are. But then we also look at a few other things. One is the duration of or the magnitude of prior penalties for the similar offenses. Because again, you can increase them, but if you just radically break with them, then they have a grievable point that you're just, they say you're being inconsistent in your disciplines. You can increase them, but there's a limit to how much you can increase them before you open yourself up to that worry. And then the second thing is the officer's history. And then the third thing is the officer's level of contrition, or if they plead for mercy or consideration or something like that. And then ultimately, I really do rely on the police commission. I think they're a very good cross-section of Burlingtonians, and I feel like if I don't have their legitimacy, if they can't give their legitimacy to that decision and give their input, and I have to weigh it heavily, then I don't think I've arrived at a good decision.
So, okay. So I think that's an area we need to look at as well, as, how we're able to respond. It sounds like there's limitations there in how we're able to respond based on that. And I guess my only other question for right now and with this case, so after the disciplinary action has been decided, is it true that even then we're not allowed to understand how that conclusion was reached?
City Attorney.
When you say we, you mean the public in general? The city council can understand how a decision is reached, but it will depend on the situation. I can think of situations where, yes, we would make a determination that something outweighs the employee's privacy rights, or where the employee agrees to waive privacy rights as well. That's another option that we can pursue in individual cases, is to get the employees' agreement to discuss things. But generally, we're not going to do in public comparative discipline between one person and another incident, because we're not going to reveal all the personal issues that may go in to, say, mitigation for one officer versus another, that might involve personal circumstances, other kinds of things. It puts you in a very difficult position if you try to do a commitment to, in every case, always describing what the discipline is. So will there be cases where we can do that explanation? Yes. And will there be cases where we can't? Yes.
Okay, so, but in this case of Mr. Mele, where we have a video footage of the incident and clear evidence of the violation of use of force policy, we're not able to understand, the public is not able to hear about how the disciplinary decision was taken and was chosen?
Sure, a couple of things. First of all, this one is in litigation. So right now, no, because to do so may put the city at a disadvantage in the litigation going forward, and we can't do that at this point. So whether or not down the road we come to a different decision about that when litigation is completed, I don't know the answer to. Haven't thought about that yet.
Okay. I think I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hanson. Councilor Tracy is up next, to be followed by Councilor Mason, then Freeman.
Thanks. So one of the things that I've heard with regards to this incident and these incidents in different ways is sort of that this is an aberrational kind of thing, or that this is out of the realm of what normally takes place. And I think that there's certainly been a fracturing of trust that's taken place here. And when I hear that, and then I see videos like this, it really doesn't match up. And then when I look at the data, that we see these disparities, that also doesn't match up with that statement. So I think that there's a desire on my part to really dig deeper into that data and understand what exactly is happening, because I really do see a disturbing trend here taking place within our police department with regards to use of force. And I think that we need to be open and honest about that. And I think that starts with really being transparent with the data on it. I think that Councilor Jang does point to, an issue around transparency that is very valid, and that we need to absolutely do better on. When you go to the police website, we see a number of reports, which I think we've made good strides in that, but we have a lot of distance to go specifically in use of force, given that that's not actually called out on the website. And you're required actually to collect this data under Vermont law. So if you're required to collect it under Vermont law, I imagine that the reason for that is in the interest of the public. So why isn't that on why isn't that information on the Burlington Police our website readily accessible to the public right now, so that we all can see what took place or what the information is with regards to the 193 incidents you referenced?
No, that's a very good point. And so we had that admittedly older report where we had a really comprehensive look at use of force for 2016 and 2017. If you've seen that, it's there, and it's very comprehensive, and it deals with all sorts of analyses of force by race, by type, and all of that. So we owe that to you again. Some of it is literally it's not an excuse. We have one analyst, and prioritizing that person's work is crucial. We do owe you a report on race.
We're 5 months into 2019, and we don't even have 2018 data on here. This is again a lag that we're seeing in proper reporting and procedures. So we absolutely have to do better, Chief. This is unacceptable to have this information there. Specifically with regards to that data, of those 193 incidents, how many of the individuals involved in those incidents were people of color?
That's in the slide there. It's something like 23%, 22%, something like it's in that bar graph.
And do we know whether the use of force that was used against people of color was of a greater degree than use of
No,
force against
that
white
would be the
people?
topic of an analysis. You're owed that.
I would really like to see that information because I think it's crucial. I think that with the racist tendencies in our society, I think there's a tendency for white folks to use violence against black folks in a more intense degree, and we need to be understanding not only what types of incidents, but the severity and who it's used against, because that's crucial to understanding this problem that we have, because it is in fact a deep, deep problem.
It's a legitimate concern.
In terms of the qualitative aspects of this, because these are numbers that we see on a website, but I'm really also concerned about the trauma and the community impact that this has on individuals that suffer these use of force incidents, because it doesn't just the incident doesn't just happen and then end. It lives with these individuals in our community and makes them afraid to be in public spaces in some cases. It makes them have physical, disabilities as a result of that. And in the case of Mr. Kilburn, potentially pass away. And so I'm wondering, what is, from the time that a use of force incident happens, what happens, what are the steps that the Burlington Police takes to proactively make sure that people are, what are the ways that people are able to make sure that they're okay? And I don't know that necessarily the police are the people to do that, because these people are probably traumatized by their interaction with police, but what are ways that folks who have experienced this trauma, are we able to make sure that they're able to have access to the services that they need to make sure that they're in recovery, whether it's medical, psychiatric, otherwise, because this is an issue in terms of the trauma that people carry with them as a result of their interactions with your officers.
So it's interesting that you say that. One of the approaches that we have taken, I hadn't thought about sending the victim services advocate out to connect with them, who's not a sworn police officer. They're civilians, so to speak, a neighbor, working in this job. But we have our community affairs liaison, Lacey Ann Smith, who's non-sworn. We have Carolyn Irwin, who's a community affairs officer. Those are the people we typically send out. We did try to speak with the Melly family, but by then they'd retained a lawyer. And then it wasn't like we couldn't speak with them. They were just like, listen, we've got a lawyer, you'll be hearing about us, right? So we did make that attempt.
But is there a policy in place? Is there a way that people know that this happens, or is it just kind of we kind of make it up as we go along?
No, I mean it's interesting, that last part of the Seattle principle is about accounting to people in ways that help make them whole, and I think that's something that we need to pursue, because normally if we do use force on someone and effect an arrest, and now we figure their fiduciary is the defense attorney and the folks on that side of the spectrum. We don't normally conceive of ourselves that way, but if you're saying that we ought to, that would be worth looking into. And in the case of, for example, Mr. Melly, where the force we use is unnecessary and unreasonable, and I feel we owe an accounting like that. That's a different. If you're talking about uses of inappropriate force, or unnecessary force, that is a different case, and we should try to make those victims feel whole.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Tracy. Councilor Mason.
Thank you, President Wright. Councilor Hanson sort of hit on a lot I wanted to, but I want to focus on the precedent for a second, because I'm sort of confused or hoping for further information. Where is that precedent? Is this in the HR, books, or where do you go to sort of establish precedent? This type of violation, ignoring the specifics of these incidents, when there's an infraction, where do you find that precedent that guides how you make these type of decisions, and how is that handed down?
Right, so for some instances, they're not just limited to the police department, right? So if it's something about the misappropriation of property, or if it's something about tardiness or work conditions, or something somebody's done to property at work, right, then we have citywide precedent that governs our discipline. So we can go to HR and the city attorney. Force, particular to policing, it's internal precedent. We look at prior incidents and see what the penalty was, and then see how this one bears, and taking into account, right, the individual circumstances, but be guided by the precedent.
And is it your understanding, Chief, that that's the way it's always been done? You alluded to sort of the state police, which has a different, and I didn't have the opportunity to go and look, but it sounds like they're published from a transparency perspective. It's a little clear what.
Right, there are board guidelines that you know what to expect from the state police, so that's
So an excessive use of force, it would say, whatever, again, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
First offense this to that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know, as part of our conversation, and I don't know whether this is part of our contract or where, but I certainly think from a transparency perspective, if there were a way to move it toward a more transparent system, obviously that's better. You're hearing calls for termination, et cetera, now, and I respect that decision's already been made, but I would agree that it's somewhat problematic whether that would even have been an option in this in this hypothetical. So, thank you for illuminating what that meant.
Thank you, Councilor Mason. Councilor Freeman, and then Councilor Pine.
Thank you, President Wright, and thank you, Chief Del Pozo, for coming and speaking and giving this presentation. Thank you for the counselors asking great questions, and for so many of the members of the public for speaking out about this issue. I wanted to ask a few questions, mostly to sort of try to create a more comprehensive view of patterns of violence and abuse, and sort of how we can move forward in addressing those things. And I'm just gonna sort of start and maybe rattle off a few of them and we'll get going. But so in 2014, The Atlantic wrote an article that says, police have a much bigger domestic abuse problem than the NFL. These rates are at 24 to 40% of the general population. And the author of that article urged people to take a look at that, and I think when we think about patterns of violence and abuse in our community, and how this might intersect with I guess I'm just curious to hear if we collect data on that in our local department, if that's been an issue at all, or how that might be surfacing, maybe not in relation specifically to these incidences, but to sort of an issue around violence in our community as a whole.
Are you asking about police officer domestic violence?
Right, so nationally it's about 24 to 40% of the general population, so that would indicate that our department has a fair amount of folks who are actually violent in themselves. And when we ask our law enforcement officers to respond to domestic abuse cases or are potentially perpetrators of these kinds of crimes themselves, that really comes to show a systemic problem of really addressing abuse in our community, and I guess an abuse of power and keeping all of us safe. And I'm just curious to hear your perspective.
So one of the things that we do as a safeguard for domestic violence, when I got here in 2015, I created the position of domestic violence officer, which is a volunteer position. It's somebody, oftentimes, maybe they came from an investigative background, but their commitment is to trauma-informed interviewing and investigation and follow-up. So the first line of detection is oftentimes, a rank-and-file police officer getting a radio call and going to do the investigation and take the report. But because we recognize that, we have men and women of different ages, different outlooks, different levels of empathy, different experiences in domestic situations, we don't just want that to be the extent of our outreach and our investigations. So all of those cases are reviewed by our domestic violence officer, who is a person, in this case it's Nikki Moyer of late, who her job is to assure that the victims of domestic violence get the right ear, they get the right representation, they get the right referrals to the victim services, and they get the right type of trauma-informed interviewing. So in general, there's a worry that Americans, and maybe men, or whatever you want to say, police, we don't always do the best job of understanding the dynamics of a domestic situation or understanding the implications of the trauma and the victimhood. But the initial contact may be with a rank-and-file officer that has a varying level of quality, but the follow-up is with the specialist who we select for getting that job done well.
And the department has a process for understanding when your own officers are involved in these types of issues and perpetrating these types of issues? Sorry if I missed that.
I'm sorry.
I might have
Every
missed it.
officer in 2017 had to take a trauma-informed interviewing course as part of their domestic violence training as a matter of state regulation. But where I just say the problem with domestic violence is silence, right? I mean, that's an issue. I don't have any special and you know this, I don't have any special window into a police officer's personal life, but when it comes to our attention, we do act. I mean, we had my second day here, we had an officer arrested for an act of domestic violence. That officer is no longer with the police department.
Thank you for speaking to that a bit. So I do want to ask about union contracts a bit. My research on this issue has shown that that's quite a big part in creating fair policing, and I don't want to speak about particular personnel or employees specifically. I really just want to know generally, and so and I guess this comes from sort of an idea that it is, of course, like I unequivocally agree that people have a right to work in fair and good conditions, but the right to violence is an unfair protection. So I'm just trying to, if you're not the one to speak on this, and I don't know how much, are the contracts public? I don't know if this was previously just asked. Did you just ask this, Councilor Mason?
Yes, the contracts are public.
Okay, so
there is one current union contract for the police.
Okay, the contract is public. Okay, sorry if I missed that. So are you able to speak to some of the areas in that, or who is able to speak to the areas in which that contract might essentially create unfair protections?
Tonight or in general?
Both, but also in a way that would be that we could eventually be public and transparent about it.
We can definitely.
I guess I think we have to be careful here that the city does not believe there is anything in the contracts that creates an unfair protection. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't something for folks to discuss, to say we'd like to change this when we go to another contract negotiation. But I think asking the chief or anyone in city administration to characterize what is unfair in it, I would have to say you should not be doing that, because the city has voted for this contract as a fair contract.
Is there a better term than
I would say if there were,
because I understand that this is it's a legal term, so is there a way to say that, are there, yeah.
well, in my mind, I think it is fair for you to say that in the course of looking at this use of force and other issues that you're bringing up, that you might want to look at the contract language and say, we're concerned with what the effect of this is. Some of that we might want to have to talk to you about in executive session, at least initially, to discuss what the police department's experience with those provisions is and how they work out in practice.
Okay, that sounds sufficient. So I'm wondering also about this question of oversight, and my understanding is that the Police Commission is sort of a quasi-oversight, but does not have a whole lot of independence or authority, and so I'm wondering what pathway you might think exists to create a more independent and a body with more authority and more resources, and if you think what your opinion is on that in terms of its how effective or whether that's an essential aspect of sort of moving forward and creating safe policing in our community.
I think it would definitely be helpful to further clarify and even expand the role of the Police Commission, because first of all, they take their job very seriously. They put a lot of work into what they're doing. They try really hard to give feedback. They spend hours watching body camera footage and debating with each other, and there's not consensus. There's sometimes genuine debates and arguments about the right way to go, and I listen to them, and if I can't come away feeling like I've properly accounted for the work of the commission, then I don't feel like I've done my job. But that said, I think one of the things that is missing is that connect between the commission and the wider community and the council. There are ways that even if it's an executive session or something where they could, looking back on the opportunities that Councilor Dang feels were lost, like it doesn't seem like anything would have prevented the commission from briefing the council in session about these investigations, and don't hear it from me, but hear their impressions about the body camera, hear their impressions about the investigation, and at least know what's going on by way of update. The issue of who has the authority ultimately to discipline and be accountable for police is a real question, right? And so There may be, for example, in New York, citizens have investigative authority, and they have the right to make findings, and they have the right to make those findings public. But once they're public, it's up to the police commissioner to render the discipline. But he has to do it knowing that there are publicly rendered findings, right? That there's that transparency. These are all things that I think are worthwhile. And frankly, you know, it would be helpful to have some of that guidance and some of that input be more public, because it would seem less mysterious. It would also, you know, add, I think, like strength and legitimacy to if it was more public, to the disciplinary decisions I make.
Thank you. I just have a few more questions. So in regards to the training at the Vermont State Police Academy and the fact that that's a paramilitary environment, it's a 16-week or 17-week, I believe, program. I guess I'm wondering if you can speak toward some of the problems that might be coming out of the fact that that's a paramilitary environment and the type of training and...
Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. You know, it's no secret that, like, I made a formal allegation of misconduct against the Vermont Police Academy for the way it was training recruits and the way it was delivering head strikes and what that was doing to the tenor of the recruits we were getting, as well as giving them concussions and hearing loss. But that said, so I'll just take a minute to unpack a few things. I've come to the opinion that we want to be able to hire the right people to work in Burlington with the right level of maturity, with some work experience or references we can check. I became a cop when I was 22, and it's rolling the dice as to whether I would have been the right maturity and the right type of cop, right? It's harder to get people to come to Vermont or be in Vermont and become cops when they have to make a commitment to live 16 or 17 weeks down in Pittsburgh. If you have a family, if you have a home life, if you have people who need your help and you just disappear for 17 weeks, 16 weeks, except for weekends, that is a challenge for recruiting some people. Also, it's, you know, some sort of discipline in regimented environment is important to make sure that people can follow instructions and like perform under pressure. But the idea that it has to be a certain type of paramilitary environment is very much open to question. You have the King County, Washington Police Department completely moving away from a paramilitary model. You have DC police right now gradually moving away from a paramilitary model. And then the New York City Police Department was not residential and it was like quasi paramilitary. So there is a proposal in Chittenden County now to have Champlain run an alternate police academy. That'll be an opportunity to explore a lot of that. But there are definite challenges to us being physically distant from the academy, us having to recruit people who can commit to living there for 16 weeks, and then us having like just a pretty modest or small say over what the curriculum is. We don't really have much of a say over what the curriculum is. So these are all valid concerns.
Thank you. I have two more questions, if that's okay. Specifically to all the folks who came out to speak about the petition being and demands being put forward by Black Lives Matter Greater Burlington. I understand you can't speak towards the demands regarding personnel, but the other demands, which I believe, if I'm summarizing correctly, are that we move towards a model that creates public funding for community resources and social workers, and that would effectively cap or start to limit like the ratio of law enforcement officers to the general population, and then that other request about regarding body camera footage and whether that would be publicly released immediately, and whether, so I'm just wondering if you would be in support of those demands.
Sure. So to make it clear, I know that we have something in front of the Supreme Court about our ability to charge for redacting body camera footage. I will say, and I say this in all sincerity, that process is getting faster and cheaper every day, and the price of having to do redactions is going down and down and down. And I recognize that there's this tension that when the police department feels it needs to release body camera footage, we'll spend our time and our money redacting it and putting it out. When a citizen wants to ask a question about police conduct, just as a matter of keeping with the uniform public records policy, we charge them. Like that's a contradiction. Like I don't take that lightly. I recognize that like our need to charge for the redaction stems from implications that go across departments and across agencies and apply to how the city treats public records requests. But I admit it's in tension with the fact that when it suits us, we put the footage out. So I'd like it to become like really cheap really fast, and I'd like it to be as open as possible. My hope is that you'll find that most of it is like extremely boring and not worthy of further attention, but that's a proposition I have to prove to you. So I approve of the idea of releasing as much footage as we can, as soon as we can, as cheaply as we can, reconciling it with what we were saying about footage that's under litigation, footage that's under investigation, footage that the DA or the defense attorneys have asked us to withhold. As far as social work goes, I mean, I think we have in fact hired a social worker in we have street outreach, and I know it's related to the opioid crisis, but 2 doors down from my office is a 30-year addiction and recovery social worker. We did make an investment into that. And I know that street outreach is an extremely valuable program with people who are crisis interventionists. So, I mean, I would say if we are looking to make, I have the privilege of serving on the board of the Howard Center. And I did that because I thought it was really important to learn as much as I can about mental health crises and about addiction. And I have the burden of being on the finance committee. And I could say that the way to deliver the mental health and crisis interventions that people need, really, in our community, will not be accomplished by the margin of 1 or 2 police officers or 3 police officers. It goes like really far beyond that. It's in almost the millions. So I'm not saying, hey, you know, there's no need to look at the police budget. Like I'm saying, our budget is not expanding that much. Our headcount is actually, although I want it to get to 105, it's remained steady in the high 90s. If we're looking to expand the city's expenditures, we could look into hiring. I'm not saying this is a throwaway. Like, if we could hire more social workers, I think it would be a relief to some police officers. But that said, it will still not solve our most intractable mental health problems in this community if the margin is a handful of employees.
I'll say, Councilor Freeman.
Oh, no, I have one other question.
Okay, we need to move toward wrapping up, so one more.
One more question.
Yes, you've had a bit of time.
Was just, there was someone who spoke in public comment about the reaction of authorities during issues of hate crime, and I just wanted to hear from you about your characterization of your leadership going forward and how you see, I do think that you and other administrators will play a key role in this, so I'm just sort of...
About hate crimes?
Not hate crimes, but just sort of this issue of violence and police brutality, and how do you, there's been questions here of your leadership, and I'm not necessarily doing that in this moment, but I'm just curious how you would characterize your role in this going forward.
No, I mean, I think that number one, it's important to know when to, so leadership in this role going forward, I think that when we're talking about, so the case law and the training and the best practices around use of force are not these rapidly evolving things. They're fairly steady right now in terms of de-escalation, in terms of what the case law is, and in terms of what the training best practices are. And I think that right now, one of the most important things that I could probably do is understand like the limits of my role, that if we have the right level of input from the community and the government, and I mean the community, not just like some pro forma, like these are the 3 people who represent us, but really meaningful community input. If we have input from the community, input from the government, and then really also input from the police officers, who are the men and women who have to work under these conditions, like that is some of the best ways to get some of the clarifications and reforms you're seeking, and not like my imperious guiding of the process.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Freeman. I'm now going to go to any councilor that hasn't spoken yet. I have a couple other councilors that have already spoken. We'll come back to you. Councilor Paulino has not spoken, so you're up next.
Chief, I want to thank you for coming here tonight. I think a lot of things have been said, and one of the things that I'm reminded, you know, I see this, a lot of things have been said tonight. But one of the things you said that, I'll be honest with you, I didn't know what to ask you coming here today, despite my broad experience in the subject matter. But I feel comforted that you used the words unreasonable and unnecessary, and I wrote them down, because you know, the fact that you're the leader of this organization, and that's the way you characterize the issues that we've talked about today, I feel comforted that going forward, you'll engage the public in making reasonable and necessary reforms. I'd like to see a conversation a year from now, where we have, potentially maybe 2 years from now, Howard Mental Health Street Outreach Team member embedded in the police department like we did back in 2015. I'd like to see an incentive program for Burlington police officers who live in Burlington so they can have a strong connection to the community. Those are just a few ideas. We talked about quality of life initiatives and team building. Those are other things, but I think for me it would be helpful to know from you as well as the union, sort of like a list of demands going forward as we form this joint commission. What are the things that we could immediately check off a list and move forward? We can't, obviously what happened is the reason we're here, and it's unfortunate, but we can certainly try to move forward from this and use this as an opportunity to strengthen our police department. But more importantly, I think, is the focus on the connection with the community policing, and those sort of efforts. So it's sort of a question / comment. I think I just wanted to get confirmation from you that you'll be fully engaged in public forums or receiving the joint commission.
No, of course. I mean, one of the things that really struck me with what you said is this encouragement to have police officers live in the city. I'm always excited when I can hire one. I find that the ones that live in the city, we have great cops who live far from the city, but the ones that live in the city really feel vested in it. I think that's something to strive for, and it's the only way I could not police a city I feel that I didn't live in. And one of the reasons I started looking north away from New York is once I moved out of the city, it stopped resonating with me as much. So things like that I think are really important, and I think that just reiterates that we want buy-in from the police officers as we go forward. So not only me being vocal about it, but I want cops at the table.
And another idea is, would you support a fair and impartial policing commission, or a fair and impartial component to the police commission? Sort of more statistical based. I think you do some of that already, but maybe taking a second look at that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we have the fair and impartial policing policy. We're talking about something different. You're talking about a commission that or one of the roles of the commission to really look at disparity and how it plays out, and look at, yeah, no, I mean, that's the way things are going, and I think we can't solve the problems in America unless we take that really seriously. So I don't know what that would look like right now, but you're onto something.
Thank you, Councilor Paulino. Councilor Shannon.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say that I really appreciate your presentation, as well as the questions and comments from my fellow counselors. I found tonight really informative, and I do appreciate your leadership and your introspection on this issue, and I don't think that we're here to deny that there are problems in our community, but it's my hope that we can recognize those problems, and I feel like you have been open and direct with us in that recognition, and I think that we all want to have confidence in our police department, and that confidence has been shaken, which I think you and the officers within the department, I expect all are feeling the same. It's important for us to find a path forward together without scapegoats to actually solve these problems, and I think that this discussion tonight has been a good step in that direction. I also appreciate the comments of the mayor, and that you are willing to put resources, real financial resources into looking at this, and I think it's been brought out by other counselors that policing, as well as the mayor, recognition that policing in America is at a turning point now, and hopefully we're at the forefront of addressing those problems, and that's hard to do, because it's a lot easier to not be the ones inventing the wheel. And I know that you have dug deep to look at other communities, to look at the best practices in other communities, to bring in the resources from those other communities to Burlington and to tread new ground here in Burlington where needed. So I look forward to continuing to work with our community to improve our relationships and to find ways to do a better job. It's a hard job, and all of our lives depend on being able to support our police to do the job that they want to do and that we want them to do. And it's both our lives and their lives that depend on that, and I think we all recognize that. So thank you for continuing to work with us, and thank you to all those who have come out to show that this community really cares about this issue. And I think we're all committed to working on this and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Shannon. Councilor Paul.
Thank you, President Wright. So as a lot of people have already said this evening, I'd also like to thank everyone who came and spoke this evening. My thanks also to Chief Del Pozo for coming. These are not easy conversations to have, and we appreciate your being here. You know, when I saw the videos, and I've now watched them a couple of times, you know, I think I probably shared the same response that a lot of people had, which is that you're saddened, you're shocked, you're appalled at what you see. And, you know, I'm not a medical expert by any stretch. I just saw what I saw. But I'd also particularly like to acknowledge the words of the first person who spoke, who I believe is still here, and that's Dr. Kevin Rogers. I've known Kevin since our children, who are now young adults, played Little League together. So I've known him a long time. And Kevin was pretty modest when he spoke earlier about, pretty modest in his comments about himself. You know, this is someone who's devoted their professional life to not only emergency medicine, treating people in this community, in this state, treating people in regions of the world, and offering his services to improve the lives of many people. He is an expert, and I believe him when he says that the force that was used in these videos, the ones that we have all seen, have lasting repercussions on a person's health. And as an elected official, I do feel a responsibility, as I believe we all do, to make this right and to move forward and do better. The other thing I did want to also mention, and a number of people have sort of alluded to this, is that, you know, over the past couple of weeks, I've had several people in Ward 6 and in other parts of the city who have reached out to me to share their perspective on what we're all here to talk about. And, you know, in some cases, you know, with really tears in their eyes, they've conveyed to me the fear that they have, people who either are of color or parents of children of color, the fear that they have every single time their young adult leaves the house. I've had parents that have told me that they tell their children, particularly young men of color, to be mindful that they could be stopped by the police at any time, and have encouraged their children to understand that sometimes they might not be stopped for any reason other than who they are. Now, you know, I have 3 children. 2 of them are young men. They're both 20, in their 20s. I don't say that to my children when they leave in the morning. That's my reality, but that doesn't mean that what goes on for every other person isn't our collective reality, and we have to own that. So I hope that we can do better. That does concern me, the number of traffic stops, those do concern me, and I think we have to be mindful of the fact that this is not, I don't see in the numbers that there is a trend that shows that we are getting better at that. So that's something that concerns me. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and I'll close with saying, is that one of the things that we are, I think, and rightfully so, very, very proud of in this community is that we have done, we have really, due to, large part the efforts of the chief of police as well as the mayor, have really taken on the opioid crisis. It still is a struggle and a battle every day, but we are definitely showing progress. And what we have always said is that we're not going to rest until no one dies from an overdose. And I don't think that we should really rest until everyone feels safe in this community, no matter who they are. So we still have plenty of work to do, and I look forward to doing that work with everyone here and with everyone in this community. So I don't know if you want to respond to any of that, but those are just my thoughts. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Councilor Pollock. Now we'll go back to Councilor Pine and then Councilor Jang.
At this late hour, I hesitate to do this because it's almost a new topic, but it's related, and I'll just ask if you could speak about the growing diversity of our population. As a city, we struggle with having our workforce reflect the growing diversity of our population. That's not unique to the police department, but I'd like you just to talk about how we're doing in that regard and what are your plans to deal with sort of affirmative hiring practices to ensure that our police force reflects our community's makeup better.
So thank you for bringing that up. It's something that we pay a lot of attention to, and our success has been up and down, and we've had good success and then some failures to follow through. So basically this, like if you could imagine when we talk about, so we have communities of color here that have been here for a while and are growing and thriving, and then we're also trying to attract people from diverse backgrounds to come to Vermont. It is difficult to entice people of color, Black Americans, to come to Vermont and become a police officer. It's almost like two challenges that when you put them together just might not make sense to a person that would have other opportunities, but we try. I recently was able to recruit a Ugandan-born police officer from Lawrence, Mass. to come here and become an officer. He lived on his own in St. Albans. Within a year of working on our force, he'd gone to Montgomery County, Maryland. He just, not to give away too much of his personal life, but that was just, he felt like that was a better fit for him. But we affirmatively recruited him. We shepherded him through the process, made sure that he felt like he had a good home here, and it lasted about a year. We hired a Sri Lankan-born gentleman from Staten Island who's a permanent resident. He came here 1 week through the academy. He said, this isn't the right fit for me, and he left. I just lost a Black police officer because he came here while his wife was in medical school, but now she's going to be a doctor in Philly, so he left. So we have diversity that goes up and down. I have one of my recruiters, Corporal Clements is in the room as my recruiter. I mean, he can nod. Is there not a day that goes by that we don't look at the demographics we're seeking for our police department and how to entice a diverse workforce?
Like you mentioned, it goes up and down, but if you want to mention the diversity of the current 5 that are currently there as well.
Right, so we have a Spain-born Spanish person. We have a Latino American. We had the Sri Lankan who quit his first week, but we try to put together these gender and racially diverse classes. And I'm saying we sometimes we succeed and sometimes we don't, but like it's always an acute priority. And to say like, do we practice affirmative action in the sense of lowering standards? We don't. It's the same standards. Do we practice affirmative action in making sure that people can walk through the process in a way where they feel welcome and drawn in and excited to be here? We absolutely do that. And I said our success has just been marginal.
I would just follow up and say that your idea or the idea that's brewing around the police academy option at Champlain might help with that a little bit so that folks don't have to really go to a foreign land and hang out in Pittsford for a week.
I do feel that, for example, this recruit who just left after a week, he was sort of like, he was an auxiliary officer in the New York City Police Department successfully for years. His dream was to be a cop, but you have to be a citizen there. Here we'll take a permanent resident. So he came up here to fulfill his dream of being a cop. I think that paramilitary police academy environment was the reason he left. It was not for him. But then this other gentleman who left, for example, the Ugandan-born officer, I can only imagine what it must be like to come here from Massachusetts, fulfill your dream of being a cop, and then be living in a state like this. I don't want to imply anything, but when he went to Montgomery County, Maryland, and said it was a better fit, I don't feel like I can argue with that.
Thank you, Councilor Pine. Councilor Jang, and then Councilor Freeman.
Thank you, President. And I think it will be important to point out that, especially for the community, that sometimes when we say the police, let me be clear, that we have outstanding, wonderful police officers in Burlington. In some cases, there are kids that I've seen grow up from middle school, high school, and then become police officers. They were born, raised here, and they're here. So not all police officers are bad, but we have outstanding, great, wonderful people here. I wanted to recognize that. And at the same time, also recognize that how this conversation is diverting to something else. I'm even thinking if members of this council did watch the video, did they pay attention to it? Did they watch it? Because when I hear comments, I am hopeful. Let's move forward. You know, the opiate crisis, data collection, police stop site, all of that, I believe that we are diverting the conversation. What matters here, the use of force is present. Discrimination is present. Today, at August 1st, I met with a woman, a new North Ender, who told me a story. 6-year-old child with mental health problem. She couldn't make it here today, but it even struck me even more what is happening in Burlington. That child was prayed by the police to calm her down. She was crazy that this is happening. Saying, what you all doing as city councilors, don't forget the mental health aspect into it. Let's not undermine that. And a 6-year-old child, and it happened June 2018. None of us knew about it. And we have a chief of police in front of us, who I believe also received all the questions that people are asking here today. Is that right? Did you receive questions from councillors about what they were going to ask?
Some, but not most of these, no.
You see? So basically, it seemed as if we're doing what I call cosmic justice. We're not talking about what we need to talk about. And thank you, Mr. the Doctor, for your important point that you talked about here today. Thank you. We need change of leadership. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Jang. Councilor Freeman.
This is just one last question. And I know I've mentioned to you this before, and it's about the use of firearms, and I know you brought up Scotland during this presentation and how they are not armed there, and I just wanted to hear your perspective on how we could move towards that in Vermont, seeing that we already are a state with one of the lowest levels of violent crime, and I think that's a key aspect in starting to dismantle sort of a culture of violence and militarization that we've had for a long time.
I know we discussed this, and I know we talked about police departments that are safe and either unarmed or underarmed, meaning they have like armed units versus patrol that aren't armed. And I have to say what I said on the phone call. It might not surprise you, but like, this is a state, this won't surprise you, and it may not satisfy you as an answer. Any single person with a Vermont driver's license in this room can go, not now because it's too late, but they can buy a handgun in 10 or 15 minutes. That has its own implications that go beyond policing, but I would not advocate my officers, I would not advocate any police officer to be unarmed or armed to patrol without a firearm in a state where the first meaningful gun regulations in the state are about a year old, and where any one of us, unless you're a felon, can go and buy a gun in 10 or 15 minutes. I just think that, like, the idea of what you're striving for, which is the idea that you're not, I believe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that we don't need to be centered on firearm use and relying on it and think it's the most necessary thing, is the right goal for policing. The idea that, like, it should be the last resort and that there's lots of problem solving to do without it is real. I just think in Vermont, where guns are unregulated, it just doesn't seem like a safe proposition for my cops.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about the unregulated, and I do hope that sort of broadly we can combat some of those aspects. I think an interesting example is the country of Iceland, where they have a similar rate of firearm sort of ownership in their populace, and their police force is unarmed, but they also have a lot higher regulations. And I think I hear what you're saying about sort of issues of pervasive violence and that it's multifaceted, but I do think that I would support.
But just the specter of it, right? The idea you tell a police officer as a condition of employment you're prohibited from carrying a firearm, but then the people you police can go get one in a few minutes. But I think the idea of, but I understand that the overarching sentiment about reducing the firearms culture.
Right, it's a broader system, it's a broader culture. It's so I appreciate you speaking to that. Thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Freeman. Anybody else? Chief, I'm sorry, I do want to ask you one brief question, then I'm going to just make a remark. I want to be clear about that. You said there was 30,000 incidents in 2018?
Right.
And 193, some type of force had to be used?
Some type.
So that doesn't say that it was excessive use of force or violence, but somebody may have resisted arrest and they had to be, I just want to be clear about what that was.
If you do a search warrant and you enter a home and you have your guns drawn, the 4 officers have their guns drawn and point them at 2 people, just in executing a search warrant, that's considered 8 uses of force. That doesn't explain, that's not what's driving all of that, but that's just an example. Or pointing a taser, or using pepper spray, or using an escort position, or wrestling someone, any of that, or punching, right?
Thank you, Chief. So I just want to make a couple quick remarks. There is no doubt, it's been said up here before, that I think everybody saw the videos, and just want to be clear, when a person during a public forum asked if we all had seen the video, I don't know if everybody responded. I did not, because that is not an opportunity for a quizzing back and forth between the public and the council. It's strictly a time to make public statements from the public. So I didn't respond to that because I don't respond to questions when we're in public forum. I did see the video like everybody else did. There's no question that the videos are disturbing, what we saw on them, and there's lawsuits out there right now, and I'm not going to talk anything more about the specifics to those lawsuits. Obviously, that would be a problem. But there's no question that it was disturbing. We are now going to have a significant, serious review that needs to happen. The mayor's outlined some issues here, and that's a good thing. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact, because I heard comments made out front earlier, and I understand the passion around this issue, and I understand the concern. But I also am concerned, while I'm concerned about if there's excessive use of force, I'm also concerned we have, in my view, an excellent police force. And the men and women of our police department, I believe the vast, vast majority of them are out there trying to do good work every day and good things. And when I hear people say that they want to be police officers because they want to engage in violence, that disturbs me. I think it is demoralizing to the men and women of our police department, and I think somebody needs to stand up for them. While there is no question that they are human beings and they make mistakes, they're infallible. They are fallible. They make mistakes. But to castigate the entire group of police department as if they simply want to engage in violence is a mistake. I sponsored a resolution a few years ago to hire more police officers and directed the police department, along with Councilor Nodell and other councilors here, to work on cleaning up North Street, for example, because it was being overrun with drug use. And I've talked to many people in that area who are very happy about the fact that that is not going on to the degree it was a few years ago. I think the chief illustrated, I think it needs to be said that there's good things happening with our police department. The chief mentioned some of them. But let's be clear, the incident outside of Nectar's where there was literally an old Wild West gunfight going on, that could have been much, much worse. But the police showed restraint, proper restraint. And there are many, many, many incidences that the police showed proper restraint that we're not talking about tonight. And I understand that because we are focusing on other incidents that, when there's mistakes made, are very serious mistakes, and people can get hurt, and that is a serious issue. But I don't want to end this tonight with our police department just simply hearing the remarks that were made out front that made it sound as if we have this renegade police department that is out there engaging in violence and that that's what they want to do. I believe the vast majority of our police department are good people. They have an incredibly difficult job. We ought to all put ourselves in their shoes once in a while to think about the different things that they have to face on a daily basis. They're human beings that make mistakes. We hope they're not intentional, and we hope they're not racial. But we will learn more about this as we go forward. The review is a good and important thing, but I do think that I want to make sure that our police department understands that I think there are many residents who do support them, not the incidents that we're talking about, but that in general, they are needed, and when we've hired additional police officers, our citizens have wanted that to happen. Thank you, Chief. And with that, I appreciate your testimony.
If there's any city councilor who feels like they'd benefit from greater insight into what's going on in the police department, I think it would be good to schedule a check-in. I'm always amenable to that. We can make that periodic or a matter of ongoing procedure. But beyond that, I just urge folks to, we have a police commission that has been briefed on and had a hand in and seen the body camera footage, unredacted, and I mean, every single incident that's been mentioned here or alleged, including the ones coming here a few minutes ago, has been thoroughly reviewed very thoughtfully by our police commission as a way to get to the bottom of what citizens are owed as far as accountability. If there's a lack of communication from the chief and the commission outward, it's not because there's some intent, it's because people aren't taking advantage of the opportunity of having an excellent police commission.
Thank you, Chief. And we just finished with, when there was an issue of drugs that was high profile in the news, in the Old North End in particular, it was Mary Alice McKenzie, running the Boys and Girls Club at the time, who publicly stated that it is overdue with what she was seeing and the effect that it had on kids in the Old North End, that we needed full employment to the number of officers that we were able to hire for full capacity. Thank you, Chief, for answering questions for, I think, well over 2 hours. We appreciate that, and we will continue to look into this issue. Now we will go to item 4.02. That is a presentation from Sarah Reeves, Executive Director of the Chittenden Solid Waste District, regarding the 2020 budget proposal. Thank you very much for waiting through that. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity to come back and speak to you again. Appreciate the quickness with which you got me back on.
And I know that we sent this issue to the TUC committee, and I know that it has gone to the TUC committee, and maybe you can tell us just a little bit about what happened, and then we'll go to the council for a quick, hopefully we do not have to spend the kind of time that we did at the last meeting, since we've already done that, and it's gone to the TUC committee.
I'm here at your disposal, disposal of the council. So however long you would like me to be here, I'd be here. I did go to the TUC committee last week, and we had, I think, a good conversation with the councilman. And the questions were regarding our composting program, our recycling fee, the new recycling only fee. And we also heard a presentation from someone who does local pickup in town, so that was great to hear their perspective as well. And so I feel that I answered the questions that were asked of me, not just about the councilors, but also of some of the folks in the audience. But I would actually turn that over to Chairman Tracy to see if I missed things, and there's still more to answer, and I'm happy to clarify or add more information as needed.
Councilor Tracy.
Yeah, thank you, President Wright, and thank you for being here again. I really appreciate you also coming to the Transportation and Utilities Committee to give us a little bit more information, spend a little bit more time, and as I said, I also appreciated the outreach from one of your compost folks, Dan Goosen, just doing that proactive outreach around the composting issue specifically. What we really focused in on at the committee level was the issue of increases in changes in the composting program, as well as the increases in tip fees for recycling, and really engaging in a debate and a conversation around whether it was appropriate for those to be going up, but not to be seeing a commensurate, or not seeing that necessarily balanced out by trash, and trying to understand the dynamics of why they're increasing those two fees versus not just increasing trash. And I think that the council would sort of benefit from a little bit of a deeper explanation as to why you felt that wasn't possible, because I think that's definitely one of the thing that was most present for me, and something that I'm not totally satisfied with in this. And I think part of that is a reflection also of the fact that we're part of this entity, that we're a member community, we have representatives on the board. I think that there are certainly we need to work on some communication issues and make sure that we have a very active representative to make sure that these issues are identified, so that we don't get to the point of a budget having been voted on by a Burlington member and then have Burlington councilors raise issue with that budget. So that's sort of where I come out of that. But if you could really touch on that differential, because that was really the reason that we brought it back to committee, or at least why what we focused on there. So can you explain why you're seeing the tipping fees increased on the recycling side, and then the changes to the composting program, and not increasing on trash?
So thank you very much for the opportunity to clarify that. So we are raising fees on trash. So at the drop-off centers, and we are raising the fees. What we're not raising is the trash tax. So that solid waste management fee, and probably should really be called a tax, because that's what it is, that's the tax that we charge haulers when they bring material that has already been disposed in Chittenden County up to Coventry, up to Casella's landfill in Coventry, or to incinerators, or wherever they bring it. That is separate from the fees that we charge at the drop-off centers, or at Green Mountain Compost, or at our materials recovery facility, or at our hazardous waste facility. The fees that we charge at the drop-off centers are going up. So for example, Burlington is a little different because the drop-off center is charged by the pound, so that fee is going up from 19 cents per pound to 21 cents per pound on trash. But at the other drop-off centers where you pay by the bag, the 18-gallon bag is being increased by 25 cents, so going from $2.50 to $2.75. The 33-gallon bag is being increased by 50 cents. The 45-gallon is being increased by 25 cents, and there are other fees that are also increasing. For example, the fee for mattresses, box springs, etc. So some of those special waste fees are going up. So those are kind of the user fees, the fees that the generator, the actual individual person who made the trash, is paying. Those are going up modestly. The fee that is not going up is that tax that is paid at the landfill. And that's more of again, that's a trash tax. So that fee is used, and it's in our charter, that fee can be assessed if the other fees that we charge aren't enough to cover the costs of operation. So we're charged with developing user fees to be able to cover those costs, and where we fall short, we can use this tax on trash to make up the difference. So I think that was a key misunderstanding, and I was not clear at all on differentiating that. So user fees are going up.
Okay, and I think that there was another aspect of our conversation that we really focused on was also that of how do you change behaviors, right? Like, how do you change behaviors, and can you use economics in this equation to really change behaviors around the waste stream? So how do you think that this budget is reflective of that? Because that was certainly an aspect of the discussion that we had at the committee level.
Yeah, and I think the tax on trash is not a direct, I'm charging you $27. There's no direct line between that tax paid by haulers and a lever that we could use on the individual, right? So that's where you see, where the bag price is going up, the price is going up for again, the mattresses, and some of the other, small furniture items, things like that. Those are the levers that we can use to help influence behavior. So where, to try to move things towards resource or restore or Goodwill or Salvation Army. If something is still usable, we want that to be able to get back out into potentially someone else's hands. So those are the fees that cost us a lot of money to manage the items as well, that we want to set that lever. We have a lot of programs in place for waste reduction, for recycling, for reuse, for composting, and we are, again, as the largest waste district, we have dedicated the most resources to those efforts. We can put all the programs in place, we can educate, we can lead everyone to the program, but it is an individual choice, and we can't force anyone to do anything. But we can continue to educate and to make sure that they know all of their options. And one of the things that we're doing as well, and I was glad to hear the conversation about diversity, is we've also been working with folks who are working in the resettlement arena and with new immigrants. And we've just posted to our website about a month ago some translation services for recycling in 5 new languages. So Nepali, Bosnian, Arabic, French, Swahili, and English are all now up on our website. So, we are absolutely working on the ground to try to identify where are the gaps, how can we help kind of grab new folks who, even if you're just coming in from a different state or a different district, maybe doing something a little bit differently, how do we identify those people? So, we are again, being the largest district, we do dedicate the most funds. Our outreach and communication team has budgeted over $150,000 just on advertising and making sure that we're getting that information out into public. We can always do more, but we are absolutely dedicated to that topic.
Thank you for all that. I mean, just for my part, I really appreciate all of your willingness to share information. I would like to see us move more in the direction of trying to use economics as a means to really encourage changing waste. Like I did say, I do think that we need to do better with our new Burlington representative on this. So I could see sort of feeling a little blindsided, but by opposition to this budget and some of that. And I understand that you're representing communities and this isn't yours, but what I would say is that I do feel like we need to do that. So I will not be supporting the budget, but I just want to see us use that as an opportunity to go back to the drawing board and do better on that and change that formula. That's my perspective on it, and that's sort of where I come down on it.
Thank you.
I won't speak for the rest of the committee, but that's where I kind of come down on it.
I understand, I'm disappointed.
Information.
For sure. I do want to touch base, though, on social equity, and you mentioned using pricing as a lever. We do have to balance that. Not everyone, as I think everyone here knows, can afford to hire a hauler at $35, $38, $40, $42 a month to pick up their trash curbside. A lot of our residents, over 25%, upwards of 30% in the county, do use our drop-off centers, and they use that for a wide variety of reasons. They certainly like to save money, and it's more inexpensive to use our drop-off centers. They like that interaction, like to be able to ask questions, and we do have to balance what we charge. We don't want to charge too much money for trash and then possibly cause other issues for people who are on the edge.
Right, I understand that, but we are raising the tipping fee for people who bring their recycling in, so there's a social equity issue there, so it's not just black and white.
Well, the recycling only fee, so we're not talking about every single person who has recycling, right? So if you're going to our drop-off center and you're bringing your trash and your recycling and your food scraps, that is one fee. It is not, we're not raising the fee on that service. That service is currently subsidizing folks who are only bringing in recycling. So, again, just because we pay for trash doesn't mean that necessarily that you shouldn't pay for recycling. That process has costs associated with it. And folks right now who are paying nothing if they're only bringing recycling, they've managed something for their trash and their food scraps. They are somehow managing that waste. We tend to see this as overflow. And that could be, again, talking to the hauler, talking to the community and saying, I need a larger recycling cart, or I need to get my materials picked up more often. One of the things that will, I think, be a positive lever for Burlingtonians is you do go down the road of consolidated collection and franchising. You're working with the City of South Burlington as well in that study. You'll be able to build into that program, should you decide to go that way, a way to have graduated, say, cart sizes. So if you have a smaller trash cart, you pay less. A larger trash cart, you pay more. There can be some incentives built into the program to help get at what you're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Tracy. Councilor Busher, then Councilor Hanson.
So, yes, so I live in Burlington, and as I said before, I go to South Burlington. I'm one of those people who, for financial reasons, stopped paying to have my garbage picked up. And so I go to a spot and bring my trash and recycling and composting there. And it is less expensive. And, I was going to speak to the fact that if you bring everything, if you bring trash, you can bring everything else and you don't pay any additional fee for that. You did last year, I think, increase, if you came only with compost, there was a fee. What is that fee?
$1.50 per 5-gallon bucket.
$1.50 per 5-gallon?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so, but if you come with trash, you can bring more than 5 gallons and no one says anything, at least to me. So.
Probably true.
So that works pretty well. I think that I'm going to give you some feedback that I believe that that the staff, as the state moves forward with mandatory separation of compost and trash, that the staff needs to be stronger in their commitment to that separation. I'll just leave it at that.
The staff at the drop-off centers, or the staff, which staff, please, ma'am?
The staff that work at the drop-off centers, yes.
Thank you.
I have two other statements. One is, have any other communities now, have you presented to any other communities, and have you gotten any yeses to the budget? Where are you in this process?
Yes and yes. I've presented to South Burlington, Essex Town, and Essex Village. And South Burlington takes 2 bites of the apple, so they hear it and then they will vote at a future meeting. And then Essex Village and Essex Town both approve the budget.
So you have how many of the?
I've only been to 4.
You've got 4 out of the 10 that you
18.
need?
Oh, yes. I have to visit 18 communities, and I visited 4, and 2 have approved the
You
budget.
said you need 10 communities to approve, though. That's what
Correct.
you said the last time. Okay,
That's
so
right.
you have 6 more communities that need to say yes?
I have 8 votes that I need. So I visited 4. Burlington had me come back again, as that's why I'm here tonight.
Right.
South Burlington hears an item, and then sometimes they will need to go take it up as a vote, so they might hear it as a public information. So they will bring it up at their next meeting. Essex Town and Essex Village both voted that night.
Okay. Thank you. There was one other thing that I wanted to say. It has to do with, so people have said, there has been a breakdown between the communication between our representative and the council. And I just want to let the new councilors, the more seasoned ones, know that every year I ask in advance, how did our representative vote? I had to ask last time at the time that you came for the meeting, but I feel that that's not on you, that's on us to get our representative to get better communication to us and alert us to changes or things that are important for us to discuss in advance of your coming, so that we can I don't know what the lead time is between the time that you have a proposed budget and the time that the reps all vote on that budget to advance it to the communities. But I think that's the time that the reps should be coming to the communities, alerting us, so that before you believe you've got a signed, sealed, and delivered budget, you'd hear the kinds of comments you've heard from us. So I think, we need to take some responsibility for that too. And I very much appreciate your commitment to Burlington and to the committee and to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Busher. I have Councilor Hanson and Councilor Jang. Does someone want to put the motion on the table? Are you going to do that, Councilor Hanson? To approve the budget?
I can. I mean, I'm not going to vote for it, but.
Well, then you would want to do that.
Yeah.
Someone want to make the motion to put the approval of the budget on the table? Councilor Polino?
Sorry, I didn't have it queued up. I'll make the motion to approve the FY 2020 CSW budget proposal, or just approve the FY 2020 CSW budget proposal.
Thank you, Councilor Polino. Is there a second? Second by Councilor Jang. Councilor Hanson, you have the floor.
So yeah, as I said, I'm still not comfortable supporting this. There is a new piece of information that you just shared that I'm not sure why we didn't get that sooner, that is important, about the drop-off fees for trash are increasing.
It should have been, the price list should have been in your packet, and if it was not in your packet, I do apologize, but it should
Okay.
have been in your packet.
I did not find that in the packet. And
Okay.
when we asked about this at Tuke, I didn't hear that come out either. That's a little bit comforting, but I still don't feel like we're moving in the right direction with this. I think we're at a point where waste is increasing, and the number one goal of CSWD is to reduce waste. I'm not compelled that this budget carries that fundamental goal out. I think it does help a little bit that we see the increase on drop-off of trash increasing, but it's still not proportional to the increases that we're seeing on recycling compost. So I don't see that economic driver going in the right direction. And we're talking about reducing the subsidization of recycling through trash. We're talking about reducing that, which to me is moving in the opposite direction. I also have a serious concern around the economic issue of when we have mandatory compost coming just next year, we're now increasing the tipping fees on composting ahead of that. So there's this new thing that people are going to be required to do that we are now making more expensive for folks to do that. That seems dangerous to me and moving us in the wrong direction again. So while it's not as bad as I thought it was in terms of the economic incentives, I still don't see it as getting over that hump of actually moving us in the right direction. The educational component I do think matters as well, and I appreciate all the work you all do there. In fact, I would support, investing more into that actually, because I think it is effective to some extent. But we're not seeing that either, so we're not seeing an increase there, and we're seeing the economics moving in the wrong direction. So I'm not comfortable. I can't vote for this.
All right, thank you, Councilor Hanson. Councilor Mason?
Can I first make a motion to suspend the rules to complete action on this item, and then also, do you have an update?
Yes, I am recognizing you for the point of order. So your motion is to suspend our rules?
Correct, to complete this action on this item, and the mayor's update if he has one.
I'll give a very brief update.
Okay. All right, so the motion is to complete this item as well as the mayor's closing comments, and this requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of suspension of our rules, as proposed by Councilor Mason, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have suspended the rules to keep, Councilor Mason, I actually have you in the queue now. Did we have it?
Second.
Did you second? I thought we already had it. Second by Councilor Shannon? Okay. Councilor Jang, you were in the queue. Did you get out of the queue? You're good. Okay. Councilor Pine, then Councilor Roof, then Councilor Mason.
Thank you. Quick question. I spent a lot of hours in the car with a coworker who happens to serve on your board, and he said the challenge with raising trash tipping fees at some point is haulers that are kind of a little further out will just choose to go to another station. So it could actually result in even further shortfalls to CSWD. Can you just speak about that?
Well, we don't run the transfer station.
I didn't mean transfer, I meant,
So
you said it would result in a drop-off in revenue to the district is ultimately, but is that not true? You don't seem to think it is.
Because the revenue from the haulers comes from the trash that is disposed in Coventry, we're going to see that regardless. So when they get up to Coventry, to Casella's landfill up in Coventry, they have to say where the material's been generated. They say Chittenden County, they go over the scale, it's X amount of tons times 27, and then that amount is remitted back to us. So for the haulers who may be coming to our small drop-off centers, that's really for residents and small businesses, it's not large haulers. Where we may see a difference is at the materials recovery facility. We are raising that fee on haulers as well from $55 a ton to $65 a ton. Now that fee is still half what the tipping fee is at Coventry. So at Coventry, it's anywhere between $120 and $135 a ton. So that is still a significantly good deal. Even at the compost facility, industry-wide, the standard is for compost facilities to charge 20 to 25% below the going landfill rate. So if the going landfill rate is about $120, $125 a ton, industry standards are to charge about $100 a ton. We're looking to charge $60. So even with those economics in place, and I am very sensitive to the economics, we are still heavily subsidizing both the compost operation and the recycling operation. So we could see some peeling off to the Rutland MRF, but I doubt it because they're now charging between $80 and $90 a ton. And then we factor in the transportation costs down to Rutland, probably not going to happen. So I would be curious to know if there was something more specific about that, and I can.
He has a different version of math he's using, it sounds like, but that's okay. So if I could, I'm going to propose an amendment. Is that okay? Sure. I would like to propose that we add this language, and I'll do it slowly, but then I can actually even just email it to Lori so she has it. To approve the FY 2020 CSWD budget proposal and toward the goal of reducing trash and increasing recycling and composting, direct Burlington's representatives on the CSWD board to advocate for a comprehensive rate study to evaluate ways the district can further financially discourage landfilling solid waste and incentivize recycling, composting, and waste diversion, and report back to the City Council prior to presenting the district's FY21 budget.
Okay, Councilor Pine has made the motion. Councilor Jang actually seconded it. Can I just ask if we amend this and you've got approval for a particular town, you just have to go back to them and with an amendment now?
No, because I think this would be considered a recommendation, but I would take it on as a work task. So I would go back to my board and say, this is something that has been requested, and quite frankly, it is something that I think we've been needing to do anyway. So.
Thank you. And did the clerk's office get the, no?
I'll send it.
Okay, he'll send it to you. Councilor Shannon.
I was wondering if Councilor Pine might consider an additional amendment to that and add in your list of things we want to encourage, add reuse.
Sure. Waste diversion is that, though.
Excuse me?
I think the words waste diversion cover that, though.
Okay, we're not going back and forth. Just a moment.
Yeah, so I will make, I think waste diversion and reuse is different, and I'd like it in there specifically because we used to have the reuse zones, and that's been kind of a continuing discussion. I know that we had a member of the public emailed all of us about the reuse zones and the lack of the reuse zones causing both things that are highly usable going into the waste stream and illegal dumping increasing because of the lack of them. So that term, I think, is kind of connected to what was once done and what some people would like to see done again. And so with that, I would like to amend to add the word reuse in the list.
You're moving to amend the amendment, or is Councilor Pine?
Amend the amendment, yes.
Okay. Are we ready for a vote on the move to amend the amendment?
I need a second.
Seconded by Councilor Mason. Are we ready for that vote? To add that language to Councilor Pine's amendment? All those in favor of Councilor Shannon's amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So we have amended the amendment, and Councilor Pine will be sending that to the clerk's office, correct?
Yes.
With that additional language. Any further discussion? Are we ready to vote on the amendment as amended? Hearing.
This amendment is just to change. Is this packaged with a yes vote on the, or
Just the
no?
amendment.
Just an amendment.
One person at a time. When you're recognized, in fact, you weren't recognized technically, but Councilor Hanson.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask, is this amendment including an approval, or is it just a change to the language?
Councilor Pine, could you address that?
I'm sorry, the vote now is just the amended language?
We're voting on just the amendment right now.
Yes, just the, yeah.
Then it comes back to the entire vote afterwards.
Yeah.
You can still vote yes or no afterwards. So all those in favor of the amendment now as amended, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, this has now been amended and now is back to the proposed budget. Are we ready for a vote? Councilor Roof, do you still need to speak, or are we ready for a vote?
The amendment addressed a lot of my concerns, so I think I can pass.
Okay, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, President Ray. I'm struggling to remember a time in the last 7 years when we've seen anything like this kind of debate playing out. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair. It's not the way Burlington should be engaging with our other municipalities on the co-governance of a vital government function. To be considering voting against funding this vital government function just seems totally last minute and unfair. I appreciate what this amendment does, and I think, you know, if we are unsatisfied as a body, as a city, with what this rate study says in a year from now, that would be a very different matter. But, you know, this is the issues that the director here is trying to confront and deal with have been widely known and heavily reported on for months, and I'm not aware, and staff is not aware of any proactive effort to engage and help the Waste District deal with these very challenging international issues, essentially, for months. And to be now at the last minute suggesting that Burlington's not going to support the budget, I just think would send entirely the wrong message to our municipal partners, and I think really be undermining of the professional staff and the Burlington representatives who have been involved in getting this budget to this point.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With that, I think we are ready to vote. No, you don't get it. You do?
Thank you.
Councilor Mason.
I'll be brief. I mean, I've sort of following the mayor. I heard the economics apparently differently than those on the other side of the table. I mean, cost of recycling, cost of composting is going up. They've been subsidized for an inordinate amount of time. We're in a different world, so I think, unfortunately, I look forward to the rate design study, but this is the new reality, and I don't think sending a message that we're not going to approve your budget, this is not, in my estimation, the appropriate time to do that. So I look forward to that comment, and I'll be supporting this budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mason. Councilor Hanson for a brief remark.
So I mean, I agree that I would not have liked this to be as last minute. I would have liked to understand this well before then, but this was not brought to our attention until now, and my job now, once it does come to my attention, is to look at it for what it is, and I think I've laid out how I see it and why I can't support it. I think it's coming to us for a reason, right? So that we can evaluate it and make a decision. So I don't think I don't think, if we're meant to look at this and decide yes or no, I don't think we should say that yes is the only option on this budget. Otherwise, there would be no point even bringing it to us. It would just be decided by the commission. So I do think by looking at this and taking a serious look at it, I think I am actually doing my job as a city councilor and representing the values I was elected on. So I still stand by that.
Thank you, Councilor Hanson. Could the clerk's office call the roll, please?
Councilor Bushor?
Yes.
Councilor Hanson?
No.
Councilor Jang?
Yes.
Councilor Paulino?
Yes.
Councilor Freeman?
No.
Councilor Mason?
Yes.
Councilor Paul? Yes. Councilor Pine?
Yes.
Councilor Roof?
Yes.
Councilor Shannon?
Yes.
Councilor Tracy?
No.
City Council President Wright?
Yes.
9 ayes, 3 nays.
The budget passes by a vote of 9 to 3. Thank you.
Very much.
And thank you for hanging in there through a long night. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you, appreciate your time.
And with that, we have one more item, and that is the last item. Mr. Mayor, bring us home.
Thank you, President Wright. I mostly just wanted to make sure the public and the council were fully aware of the significant milestones tonight on the consent agenda with respect to our efforts to improve our water services. This major contracts were approved tonight that will help the really move forward the work upgrading our wastewater treatment facilities, move forward our pump stations. This is really, after months of planning and hard work by staff and consultants, some of the first significant on-the-ground work being contracted for to make good on the will of the voters from last November to take actions to better protect the lake. And I want to thank the team that's been working hard on that, and thank the council for the support on that effort. And with that, I'll let this night come to an end here, President Wright.
Thank you for the brief report, Mr. Mayor. Move to adjourn.
So moved.
By Councilor Ruth, seconded by Councilor Busher. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.